The story begins with a battle between the Demon King, Galt Luzin, and the hero Angelica with her companion, Selene. As they attacked Galt, their blows seemed to have no effect. Galt remarked that such attacks were meaningless against him. Angelica was astonished to see that Selene's magic attack had managed to scratch him slightly. Galt admitted that in theory it had some effect, but if word got out he wouldn't look so invincible anymore. He reminded himself that he was the Demon King of the continent of Mazagunya. Then, Galt targeted Selena, forcing her to retreat. He mused that there might be greater threats on other continents, and even if humans could defeat him, it wouldn't be the end they were hoping for. However, he was certain that the hero and her party were his enemies as Angelica prepared to attack again. He taunted her, calling her just a child and offering her a chance to withdraw and run away. She responded defiantly, declaring that she was the hero and would not flee from the Demon King. Galt thought about his personal reasons for not wanting to fight Angelica. She bore a strange resemblance to his late wife, Sasaya, who had passed away 300 years ago. Taking advantage of Galt's absence while he was inspecting the city, one of the four monarchs started a rebellion. Although society resisted fiercely, when Galt returned he discovered she was dead. He sobbed uncontrollably at that moment. Since then, he had lived in solitude. Although many had suggested he remarry, he couldn't love anyone but his wife, so he refused all such offers. He never expected that the hero sent to kill him would look exactly like his late wife, and he truly did not want to fight her. She was determined not to give up, as doing so would mean all her efforts would have been for nothing. Recently, there had been a common sentiment in his country that they should treat women and children kindly, and it seemed to be gaining support. Galt acknowledged that her efforts would not be wasted. On the contrary, he was giving her the chance to choose the right path, as she was still young and should enjoy her life. In response, she charged at him, asking why he was speaking as if he were her teacher, and she declared that he should prepare to die. He easily countered her attack, thinking she was too weak after she lost consciousness. He figured she would probably be fine, but if he left her there, a pack of wolves would surely devour her. Galt then carried both Selene and Angelica to a nearby human village. He informed Selena's father that she had ventured into monster territory and been defeated. Although she had a few injuries, they weren't serious. Selene's father expressed his gratitude to Galt for taking care of her, and mentioned recent rumors that the monsters had become less violent, which seemed to be true. Galt sensed the man's appreciation, and that even though Selene had been captured by monsters, she wouldn't be harmed. It seemed the conflict between humans and monsters was entering a new phase. As he left the village, Galt hoped that neither humans nor monsters would be completely wiped out. After all, no one wanted to witness the death of their loved ones, and bringing people back to their homes was a painful task for Demon King Galt. Angelica was the last person Galt wanted to face. The sight of her unconscious reminded him too much of his wife. He knew that Sasaya was different. After all, she had horns. Galt realized it was pointless to dwell on such comparisons. Afterward, Galt teleported to the village where Angelica was born, a place known as the cradle of many famous heroes. He remembered that Angelica's father had passed away long ago, leaving her mother to raise her alone. He thought that perhaps Angelica shouldn't have become an adventurer and should have spent more time with her mother. However, he quickly chided himself for those thoughts, realizing he had no right to think that way. He approached Angelica's mother. Galt introduced himself and explained that Angelica had been defeated in monster territory, and he was bringing her back. When the woman turned to face him, the joy of seeing Angelica was clear on her face. Galt was shocked when he saw her, as she looked remarkably similar to Sasaya. The woman's name was Ritia, and she thanked Galt profusely for bringing Angelica home. Galt couldn't help but notice that Ritia resembled Sasaya even more than Angelica did. Ritia then asked him if something was wrong, and he apologized, then asked if she was the hero Angelica's older sister. Ritia replied that Galt was very kind and that she was, in fact, Angelica's mother, Model. Galt thought to himself that he couldn't possibly reveal his true identity, but since she'd had Angelica before she was 20, it made sense. Ritia then asked if he was the Demon Lord, saying she could tell by his forehead and his beard. Galt wished she wouldn't stare at him so curiously. He reluctantly introduced himself as Galt, thinking that his reputation as the Demon Lord was now completely ruined. Ritia took this in stride and invited him inside for tea, offering to prepare him a pot of herbal tea. Galt was taken aback, He hadn't been treated with such kindness since his wife had passed away, and Ritia, who looked just like Sasaya, was treating him with such warmth. He agreed to stay for tea and then asked for her name. She smiled and said her name was Ratia. They carefully laid Angelica down on the bed, and as Ratia prepared the tea, she brought it over to Galt. She asked if he was worried it might be poisoned. Galt dismissed the concern, saying, "A demon lord can't be killed by poison." As they both enjoyed their tea, Richa mentioned that while many people still speak ill of monsters, she believed the demon lord had a very difficult job, especially with the recent policy changes. Galt asked her if she was upset that he had defeated Angelica. Richa pointed out that at the end of the day, the hero and the demon lord are natural enemies. However, Galt had brought Angelica back like a gentleman, especially compared to some human men who couldn't be trusted. Ritia felt that Galt was much more reliable. He thought that just like Sasaya, Ritia was kind to all races. But Galt realized he couldn't compare the two, because each had her own unique charm. In that moment, he realized he was starting to fall in love with Ritia. Ritia explained that she had hoped Angelica would receive a blessing from the angels, so she had given her that name with that wish in mind. However, her husband had passed away from a sudden illness. And ever since then, Angelica had wanted to become stronger so she could be an adventurer. Galt understood why Angelica was so determined. She didn't want to be a burden anymore. He could relate to that decision because his own father, the previous demon lord, had been completely devoted to his work. Galt's father had left his upbringing entirely to his mother. She not only had to raise him, but also manage all the affairs of the court. Galt hoped that she could one day enjoy the rest of her life, free from the burdens he had placed on her. Ratia remarked that Galt might be right since Angelica was a good child. Galt couldn't help but notice the lovely moles near her mouth. Just then, Ritia called out to him loudly, startling him. Galt quickly apologized, but she asked why he was apologizing. He replied that it was nothing and encouraged her to continue with what she'd been about to say. Inwardly, he thought she might have noticed where he had been looking. Ratia then asked if she could ask a question, and when Galt agreed, she asked whether Angelica had the potential to become a hero. The direct question surprised Galt, as he hadn't expected her to ask something like that. Ratia continued, saying that if Angelica could at least reach the level of the demon lord. She remarked that Angelica must have put up a good fight, yet Galt, who was completely unharmed by her attack, was perfectly fine. She added that as Angelica's mother, she was naturally worried about her daughter's condition. Hearing this, Galt decided to give his honest opinion. He said that it was true Angelica had excellent qualities and a unique personality, but her movements were too predictable. He felt that she relied too much on instinct in battle. Galt realized he needed to give her an example, just as he often did during his employees' performance reviews. He went on to explain that relying solely on instinct can get someone to a certain level, but they will eventually hit a wall. Those with solid fundamental training can break through that barrier. He stressed that among the most famous adventurers in history, most had trained far more rigorously than the average one. Ritia agreed, noting that since they lived in the countryside, Angelica had never received proper training in that area. Galt remarked that Angelica was lucky to have run into him, but there was no telling what would happen next time, so she needed to train hard. He found it hard to believe he had talked so much with Ritia. He went on to explain that, according to reports from his subordinates, Angelica had been avoiding battles just to attack him directly, seeking the easiest path to defeat the demon lord and quickly make a name for herself. She was desperate to gain fame in a short amount of time. Galt slammed his hand on the table and said that if she continued down this path, she would be at a great disadvantage. He urged Ritia to ensure Angelica learned the fundamentals and received a proper education. He thought about how Angelica was the hero and might one day return to fight him again. When that time comes, if she has improved, he won't be able to guarantee her safety. Ritia laughed and remarked that Galt sounded just like a teacher. Galt immediately apologized for saying that. Ritia added that besides her husband, Galt was the only one who had shown such concern for her daughter. Galt mulled this over and said that it was because he was destined to fight Angelica. If he were to get injured, that would be his own problem to deal with. He was reminded of his wife, the one who had gently stroked his head and told him that he didn't need to keep living just for her anymore, but could start a new life. Galt contemplated living to protect the people important to him, not just himself. Finally, he recalled his wife's last words before she passed away. Just then, Ritia placed her hand on Galt's and asked him what was wrong. He thought he never expected to have feelings like this ever again. Galt said that if Ritia were sad, he would feel heartbroken too. He hoped that he wouldn't have to fight Angelica another time, and so he asked Ritia if she would agree to be his wife. Ritia didn't react to the proposal immediately. Galt continued to explain that if they married, Angelica would become his daughter, and there would be no more reason for conflict. The war between humans and demons would end, allowing them to live in peace. Galt realized that the reason he gave was just an excuse. He confessed that he had fallen in love with Ritia at first sight, and wanted to make her happy for the rest of her life. There was no need for excuses anymore. With a gentle smile, Ritia accepted his proposal. Overcome with emotion, Galt thanked her, thinking that her smile reminded him of Sasaya. However, Ritia was the one and only, the most special person to him. Afterwards, he took her hand and said, "Please, take care of me." Ritia replied, "Please, do the same for me." When Galt returned to his secretary, Tolorina, she was surprised and asked him to repeat what he had just said. He explained that there would be a few changes in management. First, he wanted the royal guards, who always stood watch while he slept, to be reassigned to other duties. Tolorina asked the reason behind this request. Galt replied that he was getting remarried and would be living elsewhere. Tolorina was stunned to hear this. Tolorina remarked that remarrying would allow him to have a successor. She supported the decision, but felt that it was important for him to live at his new partner's home. Galt agreed, adding that it wouldn't be appropriate for a human to live in the Demon King's castle. Tolorina was even more surprised by this statement. Galt continued, explaining that if word got out that the hero had supposedly switched sides, it might cause others to waver and seek new alliances. Tolorina asked if he was drunk. Galt asserted that he was completely sober. She then asked if he had fallen for the hero who had come to the castle that day, but noted that the girl was only 15 or 16 years old, which would tarnish his reputation. Galt pleaded with her not to look at him that way, stressing that it wasn't what she thought. Tolorina replied that from now on she wouldn't see him as some common degenerate. Galt thought she was finally starting to understand. He clarified that the person he wanted to marry was the hero's mother. The expression on Tolorina's face changed instantly, and he commented on it. She then asked if he was sure he wasn't under the influence of some kind of confusion spell. Galt replied that he was completely lucid, stressing that the woman had already accepted his proposal. Tolorina went on to ask if he was actually listening to her. Galt announced that he would humbly leave the remaining matters to her. She remarked that she had never heard of a human and a demon getting married. Galt replied that love could overcome any barrier, and that he would fulfill his duties as the Demon King, while establishing the necessary rules. Tolorina told Galt to wait because she wasn't finished, but in that instant, he teleported to Ritia's house. When he arrived, he found her preparing food. Ritia welcomed him with a gentle smile, while Galt felt a bit awkward calling her by her name, having only met her a few hours before. Ritia mentioned that she would prepare an extra portion for him. Galt glanced at her apron and couldn't help but think her figure was like that of a goddess. But he also wondered if living together immediately was a good idea. Ritia called out to Galt, asking if there were any foods he couldn't eat. He replied that he stayed away from holy water and things like that. Ritia nodded, making a mental note of it, and said that she didn't know when Angelica would wake up, so she wanted to get everything ready for dinner and hoped he would like it. Galt agreed and suggested she call him Galt instead of Demon King. In his heart, he thought he'd prefer to be called Darling, but it was too soon for that. Ritia understood and agreed to call him Galt, complimenting that it was a really cool name. Galt recalled how many years it had been since anyone had called him by his first name, and hearing it from her lips felt wonderful. He offered to help her with something. Ritia suggested that he could prepare the carrots and onions. He happily accepted, telling her to leave it to him. As he was peeling them, Ritia suddenly complimented him, saying he was very skillful. He replied that a demon's eyes don't tear up easily from things like onions. Ritia smiled, saying she would prepare one more dish. At that moment, Galt recalled the time after his wife Sasaya had passed away. Back then, every waking moment of his life was dedicated to his duties as the Demon King, to the point that he had forgotten the peace and warmth of a home. This memory stirred up indescribable emotions within him. Noticing this, Ritia asked if the onions were making his eyes water. Galt laughed, wiping his tears away as he replied that he was just feeling emotional. When the meal was ready, they both sat down and began to eat. After taking a bite, Galt praised the dish for its gentle flavor and asked if she had used any salt. Raitia replied that the food tasted so good thanks to his help. Galt looked at her and thought that he would never let her smile fade. Galt then remarked that she seemed very strong, which made sense since she was the mother of a hero. But Raitia quickly added that she wasn't an adventurer or a fighter. Galt nodded slightly, realizing that maintaining a radiant smile like Raitia's was much harder than being strong on the battlefield. She replied that Angelica often told her the same thing, but in her case it was more of a criticism than a compliment. She would often say that she was too soft, but that was just her personality, and it was truly a flaw, not something to be praised. Galt thought to himself there was truly nothing that set her apart from a goddess. Raitia continued, saying that Galt was strong both physically and mentally, but his work must be very exhausting. He agreed, explaining that being the Demon King, having to deal with mountains of political issues, and on top of that, being attacked by heroes at the worst possible times was really not easy. She apologized and said that next time she would message her daughter, telling Angelica to give Galt a heads up if she wanted to come see him. Since he was going to be her father, there might be troubles arising from this relationship. Galt replied that he still couldn't help but wonder what Angelica would say about this. He thought that explaining the whole story to the hero would be a difficult task he'd have to undertake. He considered returning to the castle to sort things out and then coming back here the next day. Just then, Angelica woke up and entered the room. Angelica spoke up, saying she had managed to reach the Demon King, although she was quickly defeated. However, she vowed that next time, she would definitely make him submit. When she saw Galt sitting there, she was stunned but still greeted him politely. Raitia stood up and asked Angelica if she wanted to have dinner right away or if she wanted her food reheated. Angelica turned her face away, not looking at Galt, and asked for a glass of water first, hoping to wake herself up a bit as she still felt sleepy. Galt noticed that Angelica hadn't quite registered that he was really sitting in front of her, but he decided not to pay it much mind. He told her to listen carefully as he was about to reveal the whole truth. He felt he looked a bit ridiculous saying this while holding a spoon in his hand. Angelica asked doubtfully if he had destroyed the entire kingdom while she was unconscious and had even invaded her home. Galt then said that he and Raitia were married. There was no immediate reaction. Angelica pinched her own arm and yelled, trying to wake up, not wanting to face this strange nightmare. Raitia advised Angelica to calm down, saying that this was real, and asking her to listen before reacting. Raitia explained that she had decided to remarry. Angelica shook her mother's shoulders, wondering if she had been manipulated or forced, and demanded that Raitia tell her the truth. Raitia replied that she hadn't been manipulated or forced at all, and stressed that Galt was a straightforward person and a true gentleman. However, Angelica couldn't accept this. She argued that he was the Demon King, which meant he was full of evil and drank the blood of innocent people daily. Galt calmly replied that he wasn't a vampire. Angelica angrily shouted, telling him to shut up. Galt and Raitia looked at each other, wondering if this was just a rebellious phase for Angelica. Angelica firmly insisted that her anger was not due to rebellion. Raitia hugged her, gently reassuring her and promising that no one was deceiving her. She really had married Galt. Even so, Angelica still didn't believe it. Raitia asserted that if there was one thing she was most confident in, it was her ability to judge a person's character. Galt admitted that it was strange, but he had fallen in love with Raitia at first sight, and there was nothing fake about those feelings. That's why he risked it all to propose to her. Angelica paused for a moment, saying that who her mother decided to marry was her own choice. Then, Angelica turned and ran, declaring that she would not accept him as her father. She ran into her room telling everyone to leave her alone, and even stuck a piece of paper on her door that read, "Demon King not allowed." Raitia smiled, remarking that this reaction was understandable and that everyone back where Angelica was from would surely be very surprised. Galt curiously asked her to tell him more about it. Raitia explained that people had every reason to think this was a cruel joke, but she would remain optimistic. She then suggested they get back to their dinner. During dinner, Raitia remarked that Angelica didn't seem to be against her remarrying, but that she wasn't ready for Galt to become her father. Galt felt that everything had happened too suddenly, and commented that he preferred to take things slowly. Raitia suggested they put their worries aside and enjoy their dinner, believing that if they weren't hungry, they'd be able to think more positively. He thanked her for the advice and began to think about how to slowly break down the barriers. He realized that he had to live for one single reason, to be accepted by Angelica, and he decided that he would make them his family. Ritia then asked him if this was his first or second time getting married. Galt wondered if he should hide these things from her, as he felt it was a rather grim conversation. He confirmed that his wife Sasaya had passed away, and he had been living alone ever since. Ritia felt sorry for him, saying she couldn't imagine the pain of constantly arguing with someone, and that it seemed Galt had been carrying too much on his own. He agreed, saying that while it might be inappropriate to say, Galt felt as if Sasaya was pushing him from behind every time he met Ritia. Ritia agreed, saying she also wouldn't want the person she loves to live their whole life in sadness. Moreover, she thought about her late husband, realizing it would be strange if she didn't acknowledge him, and she believed Galt wouldn't want a woman who completely forgot her past. Galt figured as much and asked why she hadn't remarried until now. Ritia replied that it was simple. When her husband passed away, Angelica was too young, and she had to raise her daughter on her own. Galt thought to himself that while they seemed similar, they were actually very different. After all, he and Sasaya didn't have any children. Ritia continued, saying that from then until now, she hadn't had any room for love in her heart. Galt felt flustered by her response, unable to get over her beauty. Ritia went on, saying that now she believes she can love again, even while raising Angelica. Galt realized that if he married her, he would have to make both Ritia and Angelica happy. He assured Ritia that he would do his best to help her and take care of Angelica. They looked at the clock and noticed it was almost 11:20. Ritia then remarked that it was late and suggested he sleep with her in her room. Galt was surprised by her request, feeling a bit embarrassed and telling himself to calm down. Since they were a couple now, this shouldn't be strange. Although her charming gestures moved him, he was worried he would lose control. He told himself that as a married couple living under the same roof, sleeping separately would make them feel like strangers. He took her hand and asked if she could let him sleep in the living room. She wondered if that was really necessary. Galt thought it was best for him to sleep in the living room, as his priority right now was being there for Angelica. The next morning, Angelica woke up and smelled a pleasant aroma wafting through the air, making her feel hungry. She had skipped dinner last night because of Galt. She was still thinking about how Galt had appeared in her dream. When she greeted her mother, she saw Ritia with Galt. He greeted Angelica and asked if she slept well. Angelica hid behind the door, staring at Galt. Ritia then asked if Angelica had a headache. Galt chimed in, saying it was good to see Angelica awake, and that breakfast was the foundation of good health, advising her to eat well. Angelica yelled, asking why a demon lord would care about the health of a heroine like her. Ritia replied that Galt had woken up early just to make breakfast for Angelica. Angelica retorted that she didn't ask him to do that. Galt suggested they toast bread together using his flame magic. Angelica demanded he stop calling her by her name and stop pretending to be her father. Galt asked what he should call her. She replied that he should call her heroine. Galt pointed out that not even foster parents call their children by their professions. Angelica yelled that having a demon lord for a father was weird enough already. He replied that if she wasn't going to listen to what he said, he would just keep calling her Angelica. She told him to do whatever he wanted. Then Galt asked her how long she wanted the bread toasted. She replied, telling him not to burn it. He acknowledged her request, saying he understood. She added that he shouldn't say her name without a reason. While they were eating, Rachel commented that Angelica seemed to really like Galt's food, which showed they were getting along. Angelica quickly objected and told her not to say things like that. Galt guessed that his strategy of winning Angelica over through her stomach was somewhat successful. Afterwards, Galt asked her what she thought of the breakfast. Angelica replied that it was okay, but stressed that he shouldn't talk to her. Galt felt the situation seemed less tense than yesterday. When Angelica asked if she could help with the dishes, Galt was very happy to hear that and smiled. Angelica curiously asked why he was smiling like that. He replied that it was nothing. He told himself that he and Sasaya never had children, which made him feel awkward about having a family. And now he had a daughter. Galt recalled that his own father had been indifferent to his family, and when Galt was a child, he often had to console himself for a long time over everything he had to ask his father for. Angelica then checked her equipment and got ready. Galt asked if she was going adventuring again, reminding her to be home before sunset. He then asked where she planned to go that day. She got flustered and told him not to think he was her real father just because he asked where she was going. Galt said that he was her real father, and his wife agreed as they both smiled. Angelica asked why they were so happy. She explained that since she had come straight to Galt's domain, there were still some areas left to conquer. Therefore, she planned to go to the Tower of the Undying and the Wailing Cave. Galt informed her that there was no need for that anymore. Angelica was surprised to hear this and asked why. He explained that after he remarried Ritia, the demands from the humans changed, and they signed an alliance. So there was no reason to keep fighting anymore, which was why he had ordered everyone to stand down. Then Angelica asked, what was the point of being a hero anymore? Galt replied that since he only ruled over demons, Angelica could still fight weak, ordinary monsters. Angelica was shocked, arguing that it was a waste of her potential for a hero to be reduced to fighting weak monsters. Galt countered that if that were the case, a hero could just be called an adventurer, and it would just be a hollow title with no real work behind it. He felt as if he was failing to acknowledge the royal remarriage, and thought he should be supporting Angelica as a father, encouraging her. He continued that a hero's role is to bring peace to the people, which was a noble ideal in itself. Then he suggested she join the kingdom's Night Order, since they still fought in the same way she did. Angelica thought for a moment about joining the Night Order. Galt agreed with the idea, believing it would give her a comfortable life and make her mother worry less. It seemed like a good choice for everyone. However, Angelica shouted at Galt, declaring that he didn't understand anything about her or what it means to be a hero, and that he would never understand. Galt was surprised and wondered where he had gone wrong. Ritia advised Angelica to apologize, explaining that Galt hadn't said anything wrong, but Galt replied that he wasn't angry about the situation. Ritia remarked that Angelica's words were too harsh, and that the peaceful, warm atmosphere was gone. Angelica said she was leaving but would be back soon. After she left, Ritia apologized to Galt for how her daughter had treated him. Galt reassured her, saying it was okay, and that he might have reacted the same way if he were suddenly thrust into the role of a father. He told himself that perhaps he had been too hard on himself trying to connect with this daughter of his. Ritia then suggested they prepare a feast for Angelica that evening to celebrate the end of the war between humans and demons. Galt agreed and offered to help. He thought that Ritia was truly a wonderful mother, and that he needed to do better. Not just to feel he'd earned the right, but to become a true husband to Ritia and a real father to Angelica. When he went to see his assistant, Toluaria, she asked him if his new family was on the right track, or if it was already falling apart. Galt told her not to pry into other people's family matters, insisting that it was just a small disagreement. He thought that he needed to focus more seriously on his work, so he told her to stop discussing the matter and get the documents ready. Toluaria mentioned that the documents were the peace negotiation letters with King Mazania, which were currently being drafted. Toluaria pointed out that at a time like this, not having a foreign minister was very inconvenient. Galt thought for a moment, realizing that the demon's main goal had always been to kill humans. So no one had ever thought about diplomacy, and they didn't have many options. Toluaria pointed to some people and said that they were all working their hardest, with some starting to collapse from overwork. Galt realized that a Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to be established sooner or later, and they needed to send a message to the demon lords, ordering them to stop attacking humans. He glanced at the clock, only to turn his eyes toward Toluaria. She noticed the sharpness in his gaze and asked if he really had time to be looking at the clock while there was work to be done. Toluaria then grabbed him by the collar, asking if he was really that eager to go back to his new home. Galt replied that he had promised his wife he'd help her cook, then jokingly asked if Toluaria was jealous since she was still single. Toluaria asked Galt what in the world he was doing and if he wanted to be on the front page of the newspaper the next day. Galt imagined the scene and quickly apologized, then asked if he could leave on time. She went on to ask if he planned to go home by himself while his subordinates were still working overtime, implying that if he left early, all the work would have to be left for the next day, and they would all have to go home immediately. Galt agreed, saying that everyone would go home at the same time. Toluaria got excited, saying that now she could go to her idol's concert. Galt realized she was up to something. She explained that because of the unexpected work, she'd had to give up on buying tickets, but luckily there was a delivery person who could buy same-day tickets. She thanked him, and Galt just smiled and said he already knew about it. In her excitement, Toluaria leaned in close to him, saying she was a fan of indie idols and gushed about being grateful for her unique passion. He simply told her to finish her work on time. She insisted she would handle it, claiming that was her true strength. Then she hurried back to her work. At 5:30 in the afternoon, Galt came home, where Ritia greeted him. He offered to help her prepare dinner, and he asked if Angelica was back yet. Ritia replied that Angelica usually comes home before 7. Galt thought to himself that this was great. Even though the mood that morning had been a little tense, his plan to win Angelica's heart through her stomach seemed to be working perfectly. The strategy of impressing her with delicious food was still going according to plan. He and Ritia prepared the food to set on the table. But when it was past 7 o'clock, Angelica still hadn't returned. Galt went to the inn with a threatening look on his face and asked if Angelica was there. The panicked adventurers wondered if this was a sign of an invasion. Galt glanced at a man nearby, and the man replied that he hadn't seen her. Galt entered the inn, and the adventurers speculated whether he was a demon looking for a heroine to capture and kill. Galt approached the man working there. The man, clearly terrified, said the heroine hadn't arrived, and that a little girl would pose no threat to someone as strong as Galt, especially if he was looking for someone's life. Furious, Galt grabbed the man by the collar, asserting that he was looking for his daughter to bring her home, even in a situation like this. The man wondered about the daughter of a demon. Galt immediately rushed out of the inn, hurrying to find Angelica. A little while earlier, he and Ritia had been sitting at the table waiting for Angelica. Ritia, amused, asked if her daughter had run away from home, recalling that she herself had done it a few times as a child. Though she didn't believe Angelica would do that now, Galt thought that if he could rely on their family bond, then he hadn't said anything wrong to either of them. However, if Ritia thought Angelica might have run away, he decided he would go look for her. He asked Ritia if she could tell him where Angelica might have gone. Ritia apologized and said she could be anywhere in the city. He remarked that it would be strange for a father to just sit and wait for his daughter to come home without looking for her, so he would definitely go out and find her, whether she acknowledged him as her father or not. While running to find her, Galt mused that feelings couldn't be resolved with just words, and that family relationships were much more complicated. Just then, a woman gasped, calling him a demon. He stopped, asking her if she had seen a heroine in this area. The woman shook her head no. Galt immediately apologized for calling out to her and offered her some pastries he had made. She thanked him, remarking that the treats looked very cute. As he left, the girl told her friend that it seemed demons could be kind too, and suggested they go back to the inn to enjoy the desserts. Galt suddenly remembered Angelica's friend and decided to summon Selene to her house. When Selene saw him, she bowed and thanked him for coming. Asking the reason for his visit, he asked her if she knew where Angelica was, as the time for her to come home was almost up. Selene noted that Galt's clothes were dirty, but he replied that it was because he had been searching for Angelica in the bushes. He added that, as a new father, it was embarrassing not to know where his daughter went. Selene then invited him into her room, explaining that Angelica was hiding there. When they entered the room, Angelica asked Selene why she brought that demon king there. Selene replied that Galt had asked her where Angelica was, so she simply brought him here. Angelica protested, reminding Selene that she had promised not to tell anyone she was here. Selene said that even if it killed her, telling him Angelica wasn't home would imply that Angelica wanted her to suffer for it. Angelica told her she should at least feel a little bit sorry. Selene replied that the Demon King truly cares about her from the bottom of his heart. Galt thanked Selene for her support, and she replied that it was no big deal. As he approached Angelica, she turned her face away. Galt was unsure how to handle the situation, but he knew he had to face her. He knelt down and asked why she hadn't come home. If she had just let them know, they wouldn't have been in the dark about Angelica being at Selene's house. He urged her to come back, especially since dinner was ready. When Angelica remained silent, Selene gently took her face and asked if she was really looking at Galt. She pointed out that he was someone who genuinely cared about her. Heroes shouldn't ignore the enemy's intentions. They should act responsibly. Galt felt that even though they were friends, Selene seemed to have taken on the role of a protective older sister to Angelica. Suddenly, Angelica cried out that the Demon Lord wasn't her father. Galt thought she was right. He was absolutely sure of it. Angelica went on to explain that their party had gone out to fight the Demon Lord the day before, and when she woke up, she discovered the Demon Lord had become her father, which felt like a nightmare. She'd been told that heroes were no longer needed, leaving her confused about what to do and whether she could even stay in this house. Selene shouted, calling Angelica an idiot. In response, Angelica curled up in a little corner, whimpering that she was in pain. She then mentioned that Selene's staff had taken advantage of her. Selene remarked that it takes a brave person to be a hero, and at that moment, Angelica felt ashamed. She added that it wasn't just the demon lord, but that even Ritia was sad because of her presence. Galt told Angelica he had prepared some food for her, assuring her that he wouldn't touch her and would wait for her to come home. Angelica replied that while she could run away from the demon lord, that would also make her mother sad. A wave of sadness washed over Galt, hoping she wouldn't run away from him. Angelica scolded Celine, saying it was wrong to use her precious staff against her. Celine replied that she didn't mind and even found it amusing. Angelica insisted that Selene shouldn't feel happy about doing that. Then she told Galt she was only coming back because of her mother, since she didn't want to make her worry. Galt said he was worried too, but was relieved that she was safe. They got ready to leave the house, and as they stepped outside, Celine pulled Galt aside and whispered in his ear, telling him to take good care of Angelica, calling him her father. Galt agreed and felt a light shine in his heart upon hearing her words. Using teleportation magic, Galt quickly brought them back home. When they arrived, Angelica expressed uncertainty about what to say to her mother. Galt suggested that a sincere apology would be a good start. She should admit her mistake and move forward, just like how organizations handle scandals. She retorted, telling him not to compare her to a corporate scandal, because as a hero, she had an obligation to repay favors, and she thanked him for the advice. She thanked him and said she felt better now. As she looked at him, the desserts in his hands fell to the ground. When he stepped back, she asked why he was backing away. He explained that he wasn't used to situations like this. She pointed out that he had dropped the food. He explained that those were the desserts Rachia had made for her after the meal, and he was planning to use them as bait to lure her out. Angelica asked just how childish he thought she was. She opened one of the desserts to try it, and declared that her mother's cooking was the best. Then she suggested they hurry inside because she wanted to eat the food her mom made. When they entered the house, they found Ritia waiting for them. In an emotional moment, Ritia hugged Angelica tightly. Galt reflected that the relationship between him and his daughter still wasn't fixed, but Ritia seemed genuinely happy. As they sat down for dinner, Angelica remarked to Galt that he ate too much, having eaten enough for 3 people. He replied that it was normal for him, but the food on her plate didn't seem like enough. She objected, saying it wasn't an excessive amount like his. He mentioned they still had a lot of leftovers and wondered if Angelica was watching her weight, asking if she was on a diet. She yelled at him to be quiet. He thought to himself that this was fine too. 3 days after the incident, Galt, his family, and Toluarina went to the throne room of the Mazgania kingdom. Toluarina greeted the king and announced the presence of the demon lord, Galt. The king asked if the prior announcement of a non-aggression pact was true. Indeed, there was no scheme or trickery. Everything was exactly as stated in the document. In other words, since the demon lord had remarried the hero's mother, he no longer had any hostile intentions toward the human world where his new family lived. The king agreed to this arrangement. Someone asked how the two of them fell in love. With a cheerful attitude, Rachia recounted that her daughter had just lost a match against Galt, and it was Galt who brought her home afterward. It was during that time that he proposed to her, and it was like love at first sight. His sincerity touched her heart, leading her to agree to the marriage. The priest informed the king that he found no signs of Rachia being controlled in any way. She was completely conscious and of sound mind. Angelica remarked that, at first, she felt like she was living in hell. Being a hero while having the demon king in her house was agonizing. However, she saw that her mother was happy, so Angelica began to prepare for her mother's remarriage. After talking with the demon king, she could sense that he was a straightforward person, and she believed he would never do anything to make her mother sad. The king thanked Angelica and Rachia for their courage and remarked that their battle was over. As the head of the nation, he would sign the non-aggression treaty and shake hands with the demon king, declaring that the kingdom would officially enter a state of non-aggression with demonkind. Galt believed that the conflict between humans and demons had finally ended, and with this peace, he could become a more caring family man. However, he felt sad that Angelica still hadn't allowed him into her room. She even attached a note saying that if her clothes and the demon king's were washed together, she would destroy him, which made Galt very disappointed. He thought that becoming a father would be a challenging journey. In the bathroom, Rachia and Angelica were bathing together. Rachia asked Angelica if she wanted her to wash her hair. Angelica replied that it was okay, but Rachia insisted and started washing her hair for her. She remarked that it had been a long time since they had bathed together, and noted how much Angelica had grown. Not just physically, but emotionally as well. Rachia felt a surge of happiness upon realizing this. Then, Angelica asked if her maturity was because of what she had said that afternoon. Rachia hugged Angelica. and explained that her happiness didn't come from Galt, but from Angelica's presence. They continued to enjoy their bath time together. Later, Galt asked Angelica if she wanted to go up the mountain with him. She firmly refused his invitation and demanded he not call himself her father. Galt felt disappointed by this response, but he wasn't discouraged and continued with his plan. He asked for her reason for refusing, pointing out that the scenery there was beautiful, and it would be an excellent training opportunity for adventurers, which could also help her with weight loss. Angelica angrily retorted that he seemed to be asking for trouble, and insisted that she wasn't fat. Just then, Rachia joined them and asked if they were planning to go up the mountain. She thought it sounded wonderful and offered to join them. Angelica reluctantly agreed to go. Galt felt encouraged by their enthusiasm. He reminded them that the mountain they planned to climb was a dangerous place, known for its treacherous terrain. He suggested that the family mountain climbing trip would have to wait for another occasion. Rachia seemed disappointed but looked forward to the next opportunity. Angelica questioned Galt's reasoning, asserting that she hadn't said she would go yet. In fact, the mountain was named Heaven's Blade, and there was a legend about a sword near the summit, said to have once belonged to an angel. To this day, no one has ever found it. Rachia remarked that this mountain seemed perfectly suited for Angelica, since it was related to angels. Galt commented on the heroine, saying that with a name like that, the sword's existence was surely not a coincidence. It was definitely some kind of destiny. Angelica asked him if that was really true. When Galt agreed, she decided she wanted to check it out for herself. He then reminded his subordinate that they needed to send some people to the mountain to ensure a good sword was placed there. He said this needed to be done along with the preparations for the mountain. Tolu Arena replied that she had a concert that day, so she would have to leave on time. Galt said that wouldn't be helpful, as they were on their way up the mountain. He pointed towards Heaven's Blade and commented on the mountain's height, enjoying the fresh air. Angelica yelled that it wasn't as amazing as he had said and that this was all pretty crazy. Despite being an adventurer, she was still just a girl, and wished he would consider her feelings. She went on to say that this place was monster territory, and wondered what the point was of having a sword left by an angel here. Even though it was morning, the area was gloomy and overcast, with the strange cries of birds echoing in the distance. She asked if this mountain was really the kind of place an angel would leave a sword. Galt replied that angels can make mistakes too, which might explain why a legendary sword was left behind here. He suggested that since the sword was deeply connected to an angel, the monsters might not even be able to touch it. Angelica pointed out that Galt had a point, as rare weapons were often more likely to be found in gloomy places than in peaceful ones. Galt felt relieved that she believed him. He then called himself Dad and encouraged Angelica to move forward, promising to follow her. She immediately demanded he stop calling himself that. Galt thought this was a chance to prove to her that he could be a worthy father, and hoped she would gradually become more comfortable with him. As they continued on, he remarked on the fresh air, saying it could melt away the tension in one's heart. Angelica replied that her heart was clearly still sluggish. Seeing the flowers blooming along the path, he pointed them out, but Angelica found them disgusting, and asked if he didn't think they might get lost. Galt wondered if he had made a mistake about his location. Angelica retorted that he was pretty slow on the uptake and thought it best that she be taken to a safe place right now. Just then, a wyvern flew by, causing Angelica to cry out that it was a demonic beast. She asked Galt if he couldn't stop it, since he was the demon lord. Galt denied it, explaining it was just a wyvern, a low-level monster, so they'd have to deal with it themselves. Standing at the mountain's edge, they prepared for a confrontation, but as the wyvern swooped down to attack, it caused Angelica to lose her balance and fall into the deep ravine below. Galt rushed over and grabbed her hand, pulling her to safety, and asked if she was all right. Angelica looked worried but assured him she was fine. He warned her that if she had fallen from there, it would have been difficult for him to save her. She then mentioned that the demon lord had saved her. He reminded her that besides being the demon lord, he was also her father. She smiled and agreed, saying that she used to think he had a cold attitude. But now it seemed the distance between him and his daughter had shrunk a little. She then said she was going to charge in and asked for his support. He replied that she could leave it to him, determined that no one would be allowed to threaten his daughter. As Angelica prepared to attack the wyvern, Galt used his power to create an explosion that struck it. Angelica was thrown back and cried out that he was cheating. He retorted that it was just explosion magic, similar to what he had used when fighting her party, though he realized he'd never actually used his powers on them. She chose to ignore him and continued to attack the monsters, telling Galt not to interfere. He felt the distance between them growing wide again. Afterward, they sat down for lunch. While eating, he remarked that it was just as he expected from Ritia. Her cooking was amazing. He ate with such enthusiasm that Angelica had to comment on his appetite. She added that she didn't think the food deserved such high praise, then asked if anyone had ever made him a boxed lunch before. He replied that because of his work, they often ate out, and his wife wasn't much of a cook. Angelica apologized for bringing up something inappropriate. He asked why she was apologizing, explaining that nothing lasts forever and partings are inevitable. He didn't believe in hiding the past. After all, he was the one who brought it up. He thought that bonding with the hero and sharing a boxed lunch together was proof of fate's wonders. He noted the meat-stuffed bread, which had a sweet and savory blend that was truly delicious. Angelica agreed, saying it was her mother's specialty and that it was a great snack to have with alcohol. He replied that it sounded good, but reminded her she had to hold off on drinking for another 5 years. Angelica told him they'd see about that in 5 years. He finished eating and stood up, lost in thought for a moment. He couldn't imagine what the future would hold. When they noticed more monsters approaching, he remarked that it felt less like mountain climbing and more like delving into a dungeon. He told Angelica that they used to enjoy the beautiful scenery in hell, the butterflies and the gravedigger dragonflies. Angelica explained that those dragonflies were poisonous, and Galt immediately moved to fight them. She once again asked him not to call her his daughter. He agreed. She charged at the monsters with her sword, saying as she fought that since her name was too long, it could be shortened in battle. He agreed, thinking he would do everything he could for what lay ahead. As they fought the monsters, he remarked that it was tough. Then they discovered a treasure chest. Galt noticed that this chest was quite nimble. Angelica excitedly rushed to open the chest, thrilled to have found one in a place like this. Galt reminded her that they were in the middle of a battle, so she needed to focus on the task at hand. He thought of his subordinates and where they would have prepared an old box. Angelica wondered if it contained legends that no one had inherited, and perhaps that was why it was here. Galt thought to himself that Angelica still believed in such stories. She then drew her sword, and Galt told her to be careful. She turned and swung her sword, easily dispatching a monster. She exclaimed that it was amazing, that this sword was more beautiful than any she had ever used, and that she completely believed the story that it was created by an angel. Galt remarked that it was a worthy reward for her efforts in climbing this mountain. She shook her head, saying it wasn't just her own effort, but that it was thanks to their teamwork that they were able to succeed. She thanked him for that and even held out her hand for a handshake. Galt was surprised to hear her call them comrades in arms. He shook her hand, saying it was only natural to help his own daughter. However, he felt that there was still something a bit awkward about it. She said they had to go back the way they came to get home. He remarked that it would be difficult and asked how she felt about it. She brushed off his concern, saying she wasn't that weak and was ready to go. He thought that despite her youth, she was very well trained and had an admirable quality. He felt he had to strive to be worthy of Angelica's strong spirit. He agreed to continue the journey like a knight as they headed home. He expressed his appreciation for her perseverance, acknowledging she was a true hero. She replied that although she had a good weapon, she had nearly died on the way back and couldn't go any further. He reassured her that with the help of teleportation magic, they could return instantly. She was surprised and asked if she was the one who had forgotten he could use teleportation magic. She replied that she had fought to the brink of death on the way back, but he admitted that he was actually the one who had forgotten. She yelled that she would destroy him and swung her sword furiously. He warned her not to swing it so recklessly because it was dangerous. She retorted that she had tried her best and called him the worst. He thought that with all this, he felt like he was taking 1 step forward and 3 steps back with his stepdaughter. Hearing the commotion, Rachia opened the door and welcomed them, asking what had happened. Eventually, Galt met with Toluarina, who remarked that she was sure his mountain climbing trip with Angelica had gone quite smoothly. However, she set that aside and reminded Galt of something they had forgotten to discuss, pointing out that he wasn't blameless either. Galt replied that no matter what, he always felt he wasn't good enough. Toluarina suggested that if Galt had time to feel left out, he should focus on work, especially since their workload was increasing due to the recent non-aggression pact. He replied that it couldn't be helped, as love is something that often blossoms unexpectedly. She pointed out that he should at least plan to visit his family or perhaps have a wedding. He pondered the possibility of visiting family and the idea of a wedding. Tolu Arena then asked if he had forgotten about these things until now. The next day, he spoke with Ritia. Ritia asked Galt if he would like to visit her family. She mentioned her parents had moved to the hills of a port town where they were enjoying a happy retirement together. Galt suggested they visit them on his next day off and asked Ritia to bring Angelica along. Rady explained that it was her parents' dream to live somewhere with a view of the sea. When she first got married, they gave her their house in the countryside and then moved closer to the coast. Galt expressed his admiration, thinking it was a wonderful dream. Angelica teased him, saying he seemed as flustered as someone at an arranged marriage meeting. He reflected that anyone would be nervous in such a situation, and wondered what he would say if he had to entrust his daughter and granddaughter to someone like the Demon Lord. Galt thought about the next step, and realized that no matter what, they had to accept him as Ratia's new husband. Otherwise, she would be sad. Angelica mentioned that her grandfather was very stubborn, and her grandmother was very strict, wishing them luck in breaking the news about the remarriage. Galt felt a little anxious at the prospect. Finally, they met Ritia's family. Her mother greeted Galt by calling him the Demon Lord and asked if that was all right. She introduced herself as Sestina, and her husband as Baindy. Galt introduced himself as the Demon Lord of Mesgania and offered them some food he thought they would enjoy. He realized this was the first time he was meeting them, but Baindy didn't seem happy to see him. Ritia reassured Galt, telling him it was okay and there was no need to be so formal. She apologized for Baindy, saying he could be a bit difficult at first. Galt humbly explained that he had come to ask for their blessing for his remarriage to Ritia, stressing that this was his second marriage. He wondered if he should bring up their societies, but hesitated, fearing that mentioning it might complicate things. Sestina then mentioned Galt's late wife, who passed away during the war, acknowledging that it must have been a difficult time for him. Galt realized they already knew about his past. Sestina expressed that she felt a similar connection with Ritia as he had with his former wife, and didn't hesitate to ask if he wanted to marry Ritia or if she was reading too much into it. Galt replied that he continued to fulfill his duties as the Demon Lord and worked hard every day to become closer to his family. He thought to himself that Sestina seemed frighteningly sharp and perceptive, suggesting he might have been investigated. Sestina remained calm and sharp, not letting him lower his guard. She remarked that everything was just fine. Galt expressed his gratitude, saying he would do his best, and believed he could bring happiness to Ritia and Angelica. He thought that his anxieties were just unnecessary worries. Sestina then said she had an important question for him. After taking a sip of tea, he invited her to ask away. When she asked if he would have any trouble having children with Ritia, he suddenly spat out his tea. Sestina asked if he disliked the topic of children, and he replied that it was all so sudden, apologizing as the tea got on Baindy's clothes. Ritia told Sestina she was truly surprised by both Galt's reaction and her own. Sestina remarked that Ritia seemed genuinely carefree and suggested they should both give this some thought since they had decided to remarry. She reasoned that doing so was quite logical. Angelica thought that someone nearby was choking. Sestina reassured her that if Ritia and Galt didn't want to have children, then there was nothing to worry about. However, circumstances were different now, and if they did have a child, it could put Angelica in a different situation. The way Galt cared for his own flesh and blood compared to a stepchild would likely be different. Ritia firmly stated that it was fine, and that Galt wouldn't change the way he cared for them. Sestina reminded them that Angelica was her granddaughter, and her happiness was directly tied to these circumstances, which was why she was willing to make so many concessions. Galt thought that compared to when they first met, he and Angelica had come to accept each other much more easily. However, that was probably understandable, since they had never discussed such sensitive topics. As Galt felt a strange sense of sadness, Baindy suddenly challenged him to a duel. They stood facing each other on the ground, and Galt recalled Baindy's earlier words, which implied he didn't recognize their marital status. Galt asked if they could resolve this peacefully if there were any doubts about him. Galt suggested they discuss it openly. Baindy replied that Galt talked too much. When a man issues a challenge, it's time to fight. Ritia couldn't help but laugh, finding her father quite amusing. Galt noticed a stark difference in their energy. Ritia reassured Galt that even though her father looked ready to explode, he didn't need to worry. She encouraged him to see this challenge as a test, emphasizing that he needed to fight to win the princess's hand. Galt saw this as a trial in which Baindy was confidently challenging him. However, he wondered what would happen if Baindy was better than he imagined. Galt vowed to give it his all, and Ritia encouraged him to do his best. Galt called out to Angelica, explaining that this fight wasn't just for the princess but also for her, because she was going to be part of his family. Coldly, Angelica urged him to give it his all. Bandy then charged at Galt to attack, but Galt easily dodged the blow, and with just a light touch, he sent Bandy sprawling to the ground. Galt quickly realized that Bandy was weaker than he had expected, leading him to ask if the match was over already. Bandy got up, insisting that he wasn't done and that he was in perfect condition. Galt thought Bandy was the type of person who never gives up. Without hesitation, Bandy rushed at Galt, unleashing a powerful blow. Galt felt the pain from the attack and noted the surprising strength behind it. He suspected that Bandy was putting on an act, trying to appear strong. Bandy warned Galt not to underestimate him, declaring that Galt had hurt his pride. He then challenged Galt to attack seriously. Galt firmly refused, saying he wouldn't stoop to that level. Just then, Angelica stepped between them, shouting that it was enough. Bandy demanded that Angelica move aside, but she replied that she could see he was angry, yet insisted that he needed to stop. Galt listened, wondering if Bandy was in a state where he couldn't stop himself from fighting. He thought Bandy was like someone from a battle-crazed clan, perhaps cursed with a thirst for combat. Angelica remarked that it seemed Galt was imagining something strange, but that wasn't the case at all. Angelica explained that her grandfather once dreamed of becoming an adventurer, but that dream never came true because everyone around him was against it. Galt realized that Bandy had given up on that aspiration long ago. Angelica continued, saying that her grandfather then became a reliable government official, even though it wasn't what he originally wanted. However, seeing his granddaughter become a hero had rekindled his emotions. Galt approached Bandy and spoke. He expressed his understanding of the pride a grandfather feels, seeing his granddaughter achieve the dreams he once yearned for. Galt admitted it wasn't easy to accept, but he explained that it was simply how the human heart works. He helped Bandy to his feet, and once Bandy was steady, he remarked that the Demon Lord was acting more human again. Angelica reassured her grandfather, telling him not to worry. She explained that even if she got a little brother or sister, the Demon Lord would surely worry himself sick about treating his children fairly. She also noted that the sibling would be the hero's younger sibling. And as the hero, it was her duty to ensure her sibling grew up to be an outstanding person. If they wished, they could even become a Demon Lord in the future. Galt remarked that was just what you'd expect from a hero, always thinking about helping her sibling become great, and called her a hero of heroes. Angelica was taken aback by Galt's praise, telling him he was being too formal and couldn't hide her surprise at his emotional reaction. Galt looked at Angelica and saw that she had grown into a respectable young woman. In response, Angelica laughed and said she didn't remember him ever raising her. Raitia then asked her parents if they understood, emphasizing that the family was getting along very well. Sestina reassured them that there was no need to worry, guessing that Raitia just wanted everyone to live as they pleased, and promising to do her best to welcome their new child. In a cheerful tone, she grabbed Bandy's hand, declaring she would handle him. Bandy then turned to Galt and said that their battle wasn't over yet. As he left, Galt thought that his first meeting with Raitia's parents had gone surprisingly smoothly. He turned to Angelica, thanking her for saving him and offering to buy her anything she wanted. Angelica warned him not to get cocky and call himself her father. Galt felt she was still being cold and resolved to make her call him dad someday. Raitia remarked that Galt seemed very determined, and Angelica agreed. She then asked if his feelings were similar to the desire to have a child. Galt felt embarrassed by the suggestion, while Raitia turned to look at Angelica, her face also blushing. Angelica told Galt not to overthink it, reassuring him that she could understand. As Galt listened to her complaints, he suddenly remembered someone once saying it was nice to have 2 children. When he got to work, he shared with Toluarina that Angelica had woken him up that morning, and he felt like she was starting to open up to him. He recalled the time Angelica came to wake him, warning that if he didn't get up, he would become experience points for her. At that moment, Galt decided to jump right out of bed. Continuing, Galt told Toluarina how Angelica often mixed playful jokes into her serious comments. Toluarina replied that only his daughter would know if those words were a joke or the truth. Hearing Galt talk about his family life, she found it very meaningful, as it seemed Angelica cared about his experiences as much as she cared about slime. Then, Toluarina said that was all nonsense, and suddenly demanded that Galt find her a marriage partner. Galt mentioned that, regardless of Toluarina's request, he had already planned a marriage meeting, but if he brought her along, she would only earn him unpleasant stares. Toluarina agreed, remarking that living alone was sometimes very peaceful, and that she had learned to enjoy life independently. She suddenly realized these thoughts were similar to the views of many men, and then curiously asked if Galt's daughter had a boyfriend yet. She expressed concern that among adventurers there were many with rough personalities, and she hoped Angelica wasn't being taken advantage of by someone. Hearing this, Galt decided to ask Raitia if Angelica had any romantic interests. Raitia replied that she hadn't heard anything, but noted that Angelica was at an age where it was perfectly normal to have feelings for someone. Galt expressed his worry, saying he felt uneasy because Angelica was entering that phase but was still inexperienced. He didn't want his daughter getting involved with any strange boys. Raitia raised an eyebrow curiously, asking how Galt could assume Angelica was inexperienced. Galt explained that when he and Angelica discussed having children, he noticed her face turned red. This made Raitia a bit flustered, and Galt quickly noticed her discomfort. He asked if something was wrong, and Raitia replied that just mentioning such secret matters was enough to make her blush. Ever since visiting Raitia's parents, Galt had been seriously thinking about having a child with her. This made Raitia genuinely happy. Just then, Angelica walked in, interrupting their conversation. She playfully scolded her mother for being too cutesy with her father in the living room. Raitia, noticing Angelica was in her adventuring gear, asked where she was going. Angelica replied that she was about to go on an adventure with her teammates to hunt a powerful monster that had nested in a nearby dungeon. Galt recalled Tuluarina's words about how hero parties were often selfish, except for the hero themselves, who was usually the most serious. He wondered if Angelica could handle the diverse personalities in her group. Curious, he asked about the composition of the adventuring party Angelica was in. Angelica hesitated for a moment, wondering why she had to share this information, but eventually gave in. She explained that one member was a mage named Selena, whom Galt had met before. The second member was a priest named Naharine, known in their homeland by the title Miko of Miracles. Galt noted to himself that Miko were usually female, which made him even more curious. Angelica continued, explaining that Zenke was a martial artist and Jonas was a thief, making their party a total of 5 members. Galt asked if those 2 were boys, and she confirmed they were. When Angelica asked why he was so curious, he deflected, and she teased him, asking if something was worrying him. Galt just told her to forget about it. Angelica then said she expected to be gone for a few days. And before she left, Raitia remarked that Angelica seemed very happy, probably because it had been a while since her last adventure. Galt wanted to continue their discussion about marriage with Raitia, but now he was preoccupied with the possibility that his daughter might be followed by someone dangerous. Determined to find out, Galt put on a mask and glasses to hide his face, preparing for his investigation. Galt told Raitia he was stepping out for a bit. Raitia felt happy, noticing the determination in his eyes. Meanwhile, Angelica was walking alone, humming a strange song to herself while practicing her combat moves. Galt secretly followed her, thinking that the tune she was humming was indeed rather bizarre. Eventually, Angelica met up with Celine. She greeted her, and Selene commented that Angelica seemed especially cheerful today. Galt realized the 2 had met, and since he was using invisibility magic, no one could see him. Celine asked Angelica how things were with the Demon Lord. Galt listened intently as they began to talk about him. Angelica replied that things were fine for now, but it was a real mystery how the 2 of them could get along without any major trouble. She joked that if the Demon Lord ever mentioned wanting to turn their house into a castle, she'd definitely kick him out immediately. Galt was stunned, thinking to himself how lucky it was that he'd never said anything like that. Celine remarked that that was typical behavior for a Demon Lord, and that he seemed to have a certain degree of common sense. Angelica retorted that if the Demon Lord truly lacked common sense, he wouldn't have proposed to a hero's mother. Selena remarked that while things might have started off awkwardly, one day Galt would gradually take on the role of a father, and then Angelica would open up to him too. Angelica asked Selena to give her some space, explaining that the Demon Lord and her mother fell in love at first sight, so she didn't mind if things just continued as they were, without them interfering in each other's lives. Galt thought that it wasn't that he couldn't understand that way of thinking. In fact, he already considered her his daughter, and he was determined to raise her well. Selene and Angelica arrived at the guild and met the 3rd member of their party, Naharine, the priest who greeted them with, "Praise be to God." Angelica encouraged everyone to work hard together that day, and Naharine agreed. Meanwhile, Galt observed Naharin and realized that there were only 2 guys left to arrive. Just then, Zenkei arrived, apologizing for making them wait. He seemed a bit odd, saying that he had stopped to pick out some snacks, which was why he was late. Galt was in shock, unable to believe this was a guy. Angelica comforted Zenkei, saying it was fine, and added that they had someone who was even later than him. Zenkei then suggested everyone have some snacks first. While waiting, Galt wondered if he should be wary of Zenkei, who seemed even more feminine than Angelica. Finally, the last member of the party, Jonas, arrived, asking if he was late. Galt felt that Jonas had a bit of a cocky attitude. Naharin commented that Jonas's apology was half-hearted. Jonas apologized and promised to work harder. A sense of suspicion rose within Galt. He would have to be extremely wary of Jonas. He feared that Jonas might have his sights set on Angelica, because the ratio of women in the party was high, making it a perfect hunting ground for him. Plus, Angelica was young and inexperienced, the easiest prey. If Jonas dared to hurt Angelica, Galt would tear him to pieces and roast him to a crisp. Just then, Jonas mentioned he was getting goosebumps, but didn't explain why. Angelica told him to stop saying things like that. Jonas replied that her saying so was cruel. Selena suggested they get going, and Zenkei spoke up saying the cave sounded terrifying and that he didn't want to go at all. Angelica told him not to start complaining before they even began. Galt thought this wasn't good. It had been a long time since he, a demon lord, had even entertained such a thought. Jonas then asked if they had heard of the suspension bridge effect. He suggested that if he leveled up in a forest on a mountain full of suspension bridges, it would only be a matter of time before he met a love-struck girl. Angelica warned him not to bother, saying that in just a little while someone would probably push him off. Naharin called Jonas a disrespectful person. As they talked, the group reached the forest, and Jonas remarked that the hero herself shouldn't be saying things like that. Galt thought that Jonas was right. He seemed like the type to take a joke instead of just being a shallow flirt. However, whether or not he had ulterior motives was a completely different story. When they arrived in front of the cave, Zenkei complained that he was tired and didn't think they'd be outside the city for so long, so why not take a short break? Angelica replied, "Don't say things like that before we've even started the dungeon crawl. The important part is about to begin." Zenkei then popped something into Angelica's mouth to eat, then did the same for Celine and Naharin. He even gave Jonas a double portion, saying it was to help them restore their energy before bursting with enthusiasm. These treats were macaroons from a famous shop, and they quickly realized how delicious they were, thanking him for the wonderful snacks. Afterward, Zenkei encouraged everyone to do their best. Galt wondered if Zenkei really was a guy, since he didn't seem to have any ill intentions and had a very pleasant personality. The macaroons were so delicious that he decided he would definitely buy some for Ritia on his way back. As he was hiding behind a tree, Angelica suddenly turned and looked in his direction. Naharin asked if something was wrong. Angelica replied that she sensed someone with improper thoughts nearby. Galt was impressed by Angelica's sharp senses. They speculated whether it might be the appearance of a special monster. Jonas replied that he didn't think it was coming from that direction, so they should be fine. Naharin remarked that you can't trust someone who lacks virtue. Jonas protested that that was going too far. Just then, they spotted vampire bats overhead. Angelica drew her sword and cried out that there were too many of them. Celine told her to leave it to her, then used her magic to attack the swarm of bats. Zenkei rushed in to fight the swarm of bats from the front. Jonas remarked that they could wipe them all out in one go. Galt sensed their unity. They truly were a well-coordinated group. In the end, they eliminated the entire bat swarm. Naharin prayed to the gods to grant her great strength, and Angelica thanked her. They had successfully reached the 5th floor of the underground dungeon. Angelica noted that the monsters here were stronger than expected, which meant it would take some time to conquer this place. Naharin suggested it was time for them to head back. Someone in the group said they should leave the cave to set up camp. Suddenly, a lizard monster charged at them, targeting Angelica for an attack. She wondered if the lizard wanted to duel her and readied herself for battle. However, Jonas stepped in between them, declaring that the gods needed to cherish their bodies. Then he lunged at the lizard to kill it, but the monster managed to retaliate, biting his shoulder and causing him to cry out in pain. The group quickly rallied together and attacked the lizard until it fell. As Jonas lay on the ground, Naharin asked why he had acted so recklessly. She pointed out that if he had pushed it just a little further, he could have died instantly, especially in front of a girl. Galt thought that Giannis really was thick-skinned. But Angelica was also an excellent leader. Perhaps he was just worrying unnecessarily. After the group left the cave, they set up camp and started a fire. Everyone advised Giannis to rest until morning, while the others would stand watch in pairs. Right now, Angelica and Zenke were on watch. Zenke remarked that he'd never seen Giannis put himself in a situation like that before. Angelica replied that on the surface, Giannis might seem shallow, but deep down he wasn't a threat, so they didn't need to worry. In fact, it was Nahareen who had introduced him. Zenke was surprised to hear this. Angelica continued, explaining that while Giannis might face many difficulties, they all trusted each other, which was why they made such an excellent team, including Zenke. Zenke thanked her and said he would also try to be braver from now on. He moved closer and called her name. Galt believed that Giannis was the one he needed to watch out for the most, but Zenke was grabbing more of his attention. Zenke encouraged Angelica to stand up, expressing his feelings for her, and saying she was the first person he'd ever liked since he was born. Angelica, flustered, asked him to calm down. Meanwhile, Galt was hiding nearby, observing their interaction. He thought that if Angelica seemed troubled, perhaps he should intervene. Zenke said that people would always call him a child, but he wanted to change that perception. Despite being a martial artist, he still felt like he was treated like a girl, even though he was actually a boy. He mentioned that he often heard comments about how Angelica, despite being a girl, was a hero, and he could sympathize with how she felt. Galt felt they were building a connection based on mutual understanding. Angelica apologized to Zenke and explained that she had no intention of being in a romantic relationship with anyone on the team. When he asked why, she replied that having a relationship would make her prioritize that person, which is something a hero should never do. This was a decision she had made when she chose the path of a hero. Galt could see no deception in Angelica's eyes. Angelica said that although they might be stronger than past hero parties, they had reached their current position through their own strength. They had even made it to the Demon King's castle, which was something to be proud of. Although Zenke might seem weak and was often mocked for it, he never gave up, kept fighting, and eventually became a first-class martial artist. Even though Angelica couldn't return his feelings, she felt his confession was something to be proud of. Zenke knelt, acknowledging that he understood and that this was his first time being rejected. He apologized to Angelica, who said that things like this were normal. She replied that it was okay and that it was the first time anyone had confessed to her, which made her happy. Just then, Naharn and Selene approached, announcing it was time to change shifts, causing them to act with smiles on their faces. Zenke said he was counting on them, while Angelica looked over at Giannis and noticed he seemed to have calmed down a bit. Giannis admitted it was his fault for making them worry. Galt guessed they were truly more capable than their parents often thought. With Angelica's romantic issues now under control, he felt satisfied and decided it was time to stop watching them. The next morning, Raitia was feeding Galt, remarking that he was eating so fast and growing big. Angelica sat nearby, enjoying her meal. Galt praised the food, saying it was delicious thanks to Raitia, and she responded with a smile, saying he really knew how to give a compliment. However, Angelica felt unwell and exclaimed that it was so boring. She added that it would be fine if a normal father did that, but Galt should stop doing it in front of their daughter. Both Galt and Raitia thought there was nothing wrong with it. Raitia asked if that wasn't just natural for a married couple. Angelica explained that she preferred simplicity, and she remarked that Galt did a great job acting like a father. However, she found it hard to respect him when he kept flirting in front of her. She recalled how she saw him as a hero the other day during an investigation, which had changed how she saw him as her father. Galt then suggested that Angelica should come see him at work. She wondered what it would be like to witness him in his element. He agreed, saying that if she saw him in his role as the Demon Lord, she might respect him more. Galt added that she only needed to see it once. Raitia chimed in, saying it sounded interesting and wondered if she could join. Galt agreed, saying he'd make sure they received Raitia as the Demon Lord's consort. Angelica asked if her mother was okay with that, and she figured Galt would show them his true dark side, especially since his subordinates would probably be shocked. Galt assured them he wouldn't have them incinerated. Angelica agreed and expressed concern about letting her mother go to the monster continent alone, so she decided to go along. Galt replied that it was great to have them. but he suggested they schedule an official visit instead of just showing up, as it might surprise everyone. Angelica pointed out that she'd already spoken to her mother about this, and now it was a matter of the demon lord's behavior that needed to be considered. For some reason, Galt felt that his daughter wasn't being herself during this conversation about the observation day. He kept repeating "stay calm" in his head until Tolorina noted that he clearly didn't look calm at all and seemed very unnatural. She then asked him when he had lost his composure and encouraged him to be frank about it. Tolorina also added that she had a pile of paperwork for him to approve, saying he had to sign it all by the end of the day. As he was signing, there was a knock on the door, prompting Tolorina to invite them in. Ritia and Angelica entered, with Ritia commenting on how magnificent Galt's office looked. Angelica added that the office was simpler than she'd imagined, noting the lack of any skeletons hanging around. Galt asked, "What's so strange about there not being any skeletons in the office?" He then welcomed them, saying they could observe his work anytime. Tolorina greeted them, saying it was a pleasure to meet them, and introduced herself as Galt's secretary. Ritia thanked Tolorina for taking care of her husband and introduced herself. Angelica mentioned that she worked as a hero. Tolorina invited them to sit and offered to bring them tea. Ritia expressed her gratitude, and as she sat down, encouraged Galt to work hard. He smiled and replied that he would do his best. Suddenly, Ritia and Angelica felt a chill in the air, and noticed a few monsters approaching Galt. When Tolorina returned, Ritia asked what they were doing. Tolorina explained that they were officials from the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, being briefed on a report about a new type of fraud. Shortly after, another group entered, causing Ritia to ask about them. Tolorina replied that they were officials from the Ministry of Construction, holding a hearing about the construction of a tower. Angelica remarked that it looked like someone was about to get fired. Tolorina reassured her, saying that no one was going to be punished. Angelica called out to Galt, and noted that he never acted like a real demon lord. He didn't have the air of a boss or anything, which she found strange. She wondered if he had any demon lord-like work, with organs flying around. His underlings came and went without feeling the need to bow or kneel before him. Tolorina looked uncomfortable. If this was his actual job, Angelica didn't understand why they weren't being more respectful. She commented that everything seemed too straightforward, which was fine for a hero. Angelica had read too many fairy tales and had probably fantasized too much. Galt, on the other hand, felt that something was off. Angelica replied that everything was rather plain, and that a demon lord was someone who acted more powerfully with a high sense of self-importance. Tolorina said that kind of behavior was outdated, and nowadays the bureaucracy held much more power. The influence of the National Assembly had also been affected accordingly. Angelica asked if they had a National Assembly, to which Tolorina replied that it was a bicameral system, with a House of Lords and a House of Representatives. She offered to bring Angelica documents on how the system worked, if she was interested. However, Angelica declined, saying she wasn't interested in how these things worked. Tolorina sarcastically remarked that heroes rarely cared about politics. Immediately, Angelica turned to Galt, suggesting that it seemed like Tolorina had a problem with her. Galt replied that Tolorina has a sharp tongue with everyone. Ritia remarked that it was impressive and that Tolorina seemed to be a well-educated woman. Tolorina confirmed that she had attended higher education. Angelica told her mother she was being too soft. Galt was surprised by Ritia, noticing how she had immediately lightened the atmosphere. Angelica then spoke up, saying she'd been wondering something since she arrived and asked why the castle looked completely different from the last time she and her party had visited. Last time, there was a torture chamber and an area filled with magma. Tolorina explained that that was the back gate, and the previous castle was a defensive structure used to fend off enemy attacks. Angelica and her party had attacked from that side before. The other castle was designed for dignitaries like the Demon Lord and focused on conducting government affairs, while the building they were currently in was the main castle. Galt pointed to a door stating that it led to the fortified castle, which had been prepared before Angelica's party arrived. He was looking over a pile of documents. Tolorina said that, all things considered, the castle was just a defensive structure for a siege, and the torture instruments were just replicas. They had done all of this for the sake of safety. Angelica demanded that Galt take action, saying that even if he was a father at home, she insisted he should at least mercilessly destroy the minions who had annoyed her. Galt replied that he had been kind of expecting that. Ritia commented that ever since she was a child, Angelica had idolized heroes and villains. With her eyes closed, she had always wished for battles between absolute justice and unwavering evil. Angelica declared that not a single drop of blood had been shed, nor had any minions been incinerated. Galt thought to himself that he wouldn't want that kind of work environment. Ritia approached Angelica and gently took her face in her hands. Galt felt a longing for Ritia to do the same to him. Ritia then asked Angelica if she had ever met someone without any flaws. When Angelica said no, Ritia added that in this world, no one is perfect and no one is purely evil. Sooner or later, everyone would have to face that fact. As a hero, Angelica's duty was to protect the world as it truly is. Angelica agreed, acknowledging that she wouldn't cling to her fantasies anymore. Ritia continued, saying that wasn't what a hero should do. Even in a world where the Demon Lord wasn't evil, she believed that the existence of a hero would still be meaningful. Instead of following a predetermined path, she found a hero who forged their own purpose to be far more admirable. Ritia then excused herself, asking if she could see the other areas. Galt agreed and encouraged her to wander freely through the corridors and gardens. As Ritia and Angelica started to wander off, Toluarina turned to Galt and said she had thought they were going to let Galt's wife and daughter observe his work. However, it seemed they were having an appointment with a goddess, and she completely understood Galt's situation. Galt remarked that he felt as if Ritia's healing had completely restored his energy, wiping away all his work-related fatigue. Toluarina then asked if they had completed another task. As Ritia and Angelica were walking, Ritia commented that Galt scored 120 points out of a total of 100 as a husband. Angelica shook her head, remarking that her mother was talking about him again, and that even she recognized the Demon Lord was a reasonable person. Ritia asked why Angelica wasn't sure that Galt knew how she felt. At that moment, they heard a loud scream, signaling that Ritia had been captured. Hearing the noise, Galt rushed over to ask if they were all right. Angelica yelled at the tentacles, telling them to let her go, explaining that they were just catching on fire. She pointed out that fire magic didn't seem to affect the plant at all. Ritia commented on the beauty of their surroundings. Angelica retorted that this was no time to enjoy the scenery and urged Galt to do something. Galt reassured them that it was good they were both safe. However, Angelica countered that they were not okay and asked what was happening. Galt explained they had been caught by the binding tree, a plant designed to capture intruders, serving as a rather convenient defense system. Ritia asked why it had captured both of them. Galt replied that the plant restrains anything that gets too close. Angelica questioned if that made it an unreliable plant. Galt explained that was why it was only planted in the outer garden, where intruders were likely to appear. Ritia then reminded him that Angelica had said hearing about his work was getting boring, which was why they had come to this area. Angelica remarked that taxes and road repair procedures had nothing to do with being a hero. Galt replied that those very things are what keep society running smoothly, and that those workers are the unsung heroes of the world. Angelica yelled at him to stop lecturing and get them down, as her legs were getting cold from the wind, and it was very uncomfortable. Galt couldn't help but think about her legs and the cold she must be feeling. Ritia, on the other hand, calmly said that the view from their position was beautiful, and she wouldn't mind staying there a little longer. Galt tried to ignore her words, but right now Ritia was in a rather appealing position. He realized that from his angle it would be very easy to look up her skirt. He scolded himself, reminding himself not to act like that, especially with his daughter right there. He then announced that he was going to find someone to rescue them, and once they were safely down, Ritia was still adamant that she had enjoyed the view from above, seeming completely unconcerned. Angelica commented that she now painfully realized that being a demon lord was an honest job, making Galt a fitting role model for a hero's father. Galt thought that somehow he had still managed to maintain a shred of his dignity as a father. A few days later, as he was working on the plants around their house, Angelica explained that these plants were meant to reinforce their house's defenses. As a hero, she understood that with him being a demon lord, some humans would inevitably try to attack them. This might even include extremists who would ally with the demon lord against her. Galt said they should focus on improving their security. Thinking her reasoning was more sound than he had expected, Angelica replied that she wanted measures in place to protect her mother when she was alone. Galt suggested they plant more of those defensive trees. A month later, two boys who got caught by the binding tree remarked that it was really effective. One of them commented that it was no surprise since they were plants from the Demon Kingdom. Galt noted that the tree had now become the town's #1 tourist spot, as people came to experience being captured by it. A man said it was his first time visiting, and a girl chimed in, saying it was her first time too. Ritia suggested that if anyone wanted tea, they just had to knock. Angelica remarked that her mother was inviting all of them in as guests. Galt thought that, defenses aside, this was exactly what one would expect from the only person in the world willing to accept a demon lord. Afterward, they decided to set up magical barriers around Raitia. One day, Raitia noticed the beautiful weather, and when Galt stepped outside, he remarked that Raitia seemed full of energy. She agreed and said that she loved the season, adding that it also held a special meaning for her. He didn't understand and asked her to explain. She explained that her birthday was next week and asked if a person's birthday wasn't meant to make them feel special. He agreed with her sentiment. Then she said she was going to start sweeping. After she went to her chores, he rushed to find Angelica, who was having breakfast. Angelica asked why he was being so loud. When he explained why, she replied that Rachel's birthday was exactly 1 week away and asked why he seemed so upset. He denied being upset, expressing his disbelief that he had almost forgotten such an important day. He thought how awful it would be to forget his own wife's birthday. Then he asked Angelica, what would make Ritia happy? Angelica replied that Ritia enjoyed the fun things Galt planned for her, but her reaction was always the same. She was simply happy that he did them. Galt remarked that this wasn't hard to picture. Angelica said her mother's preferences were a mystery to her. Ritia was the type to find joy in the little things. She wasn't interested in collecting objects or getting absorbed in any particular hobby. Then Angelica asked him if he had ever given a gift to a girl before. He asked what she meant, recalling that he gave his ex-wife a jadeite gem every year. Angelica asked why he gave it to her every year. He answered that it was the first gift he ever gave her, and it made her very happy. Angelica told him that just because it made his ex-wife happy didn't mean he should give Rachel a jadeite gem every year, especially since she had already said she didn't want any more of them. He denied it, thinking to himself that the old saying was true. People who know little just keep repeating the same actions. He felt that was him, continuously giving her the same gift even though Ritia had insisted she would love anything he gave her. He believed that if it truly bothered her, she should have just said so to put his mind at ease. Angelica pointed out that he wasn't very good at choosing gifts, and suggested he ask Toluarina for advice. At work, he approached Toluarina and asked what kind of gift would make Ritia happy. She replied that anything related to her hobbies would be a wonderful gift, and even if it seemed like a piece of junk, it would still be fine. That's why she sometimes went searching for unique gifts herself. She added that if a demon lord was looking for something, well, he wasn't an idol, so he could just give her a bonus instead. He wondered if that would be appropriate. Hesitantly, he admitted that Ritia's birthday was next week, and he had no idea what to give her. Toluarina asked if maybe he should think a bit harder about it. He begged her to take his situation seriously. Toluarina explained that since this was Ratia's first birthday after getting married, something that would make her heart flutter would be ideal. She suggested that, just like how Toluarina's idol would face her and strike a pose, Galt should consider doing something similar to get Ratia's attention. Galt retorted that using an idol as a comparison was confusing and told her to just stop. Toluarina clarified that, to put it more simply, he should create a romantic atmosphere, and since Rachel is a woman, she figured it would make her happy. Galt realized that this was actual practical advice from Toluarina. She added, just to be clear, that she certainly didn't want her idol to have romantic feelings for her. Striking a pose is a special act that brings happiness, but not in that way. Being a fan of an idol is something else entirely. Galt thought it sounded a bit complicated, but he understood the gist of it. During his meal, he mulled over the idea of romance, and thought he should seek more advice. He wondered who on earth he could talk to about this. He approached Selene, and after he shared his thoughts, she realized how important the situation was to him. He asked if he could bother her for some advice. Selene asked him how he acts at home. He thought about it, saying that he loves Raya and always tries to be considerate of Angelica. Selene remarked that he behaves like a normal father, and that she'd also noticed the way Radia looks at him when he's with Angelica. Galt thought about what kind of man he should become, and he said that he was finally starting to get a sense of the direction he should take. He thanked Selene for her help, believing that this would be beneficial for her as well. When he spoke to Angelica about this, she commented that it would definitely make their mother happy. She held out her fist for a bump, like a deal, and told him he had to take this mom out properly. He agreed, happily bumping her fist. On her birthday, Galt and Ritia finished getting ready. She complimented him on how handsome he looked. He disagreed, insisting that she was the more stunning one, and declared that he wouldn't let any nobles or anyone else see her. She said that the dress she was wearing was one that fit her when she was young, and she felt a little embarrassed to be wearing it again. She also expressed her disappointment that Angelica couldn't join them. Galt felt grateful for Angelica's cooperation. He took her hand and asked if they could go now. They arrived at a restaurant, and she mentioned it was her first time in a place like that. She was surprised to find her birthday gift already waiting for her. After sitting down to order, Galt told her that he had already chosen the menu, so she just needed to pick a drink. She commented that the wine was quite expensive. He encouraged her not to worry about the price and to order whatever she wanted. When the food arrived, she exclaimed that everything looked wonderful, and the taste was so amazing it overwhelmed her senses. She remarked that such fancy food seemed like a waste on someone from the countryside like her. Later, she asked if he'd had enough to eat or if he wanted to try some of her food. He declined, saying that today was her birthday, and as they were waiting for the main course, he took out a small box, teasing that her main course wasn't over yet. He handed her the box and encouraged her to open it. When she opened the box, there was a beautiful ring inside. He said he just wanted to call her Ritia without any formalities, and that she could call him Galt without any titles or simply call him my love. She smiled and called him my love, which made him incredibly happy. He vowed to continue devoting himself to their family, especially to fulfilling his duties as a father to their daughter, Angelica. Ritia remarked that Galt was already a wonderful father, and that she could tell just by looking at Angelica. He went on to say that even though he was Angelica's father, he was also Ritia's husband, and as her husband, he truly loved her. She was moved and thanked him. Galt reflected on his decision to remarry. He realized he hadn't shown Ritia his love as much as he should have. He felt it was crucial to communicate his feelings. That day, he gently slid the ring onto her finger, wishing her a happy birthday. She thanked him, saying it was the best birthday she had ever had. She admired the ring, remarking that it was too beautiful, and probably looked strange on her hand. Galt reminded her not to put herself down because she was the wife of the demon lord and the mother of a hero. Ritia smiled and asked him how long he was going to call her things like that. He replied, asking if she thought he was trying too hard by just wanting to call her Ritia. As they walked, he commented that if they acted too much like a couple, Angelica might notice. He planned to go back to just calling her Ritia when they got home. She agreed and told him that he was truly charming, and that even as a demon lord, he was the man she loved. She leaned in and kissed him on the cheek, telling him how happy she was as they headed home. When they got home, Angelica asked Galt how it went. He replied that he didn't miss out on a single thing. She smiled and said that was good. Ritia looked so happy. Galt thought about how cute his wife was and felt pleased that he'd done everything he could to give her a wonderful time. Then Angelica asked if they were thinking about having a baby. Galt got flustered and told her not to think about things like that, insisting that he wasn't obligated to answer her. Her face turned red as she shot back that his reaction just proved they'd already done it, and that it was honestly a lot for her to handle. As their daughter, she warned him to stay away from her. He sighed, commenting that puberty was a complicated thing. Angelica snapped back, insisting that he couldn't just blame it on puberty and that he didn't get it. She cried out that she was under a lot of pressure. In a fit of anger, she started throwing things at him, and he asked her to stop, reminding her that he was against domestic violence. She screamed at him to shut up, saying that she used to think having a demon lord for a father would be the worst thing in the world. After all that commotion died down, Angelica came out of the bathroom. She found Galt engrossed in a book. She asked if he was doing something other than his usual duties. He replied that for him, reading was a form of entertainment. Coming closer, she admitted that she didn't understand it at all. As she glanced at the book, she noticed it was from the kingdom and asked if he could read the human language. He explained that he could, but the notation was different. Curious, she looked closer at the book, and he mentioned that it was indeed a book from the kingdom, though an old one, as the notation had changed a lot over time. He revealed that he had studied abroad at Magenia University a very long time ago. Angelica was surprised to hear about that university and asked why a demon lord would attend a human educational institution, noting that such an act would surely cause a war immediately if discovered. Galt reassured her that it was a long time ago, explaining that he simply hid his horns while attending. Many high-ranking demons also used to send their children to human universities to promote healthy competition and improve relations with humans. She remarked that it sounded like a huge culture shock. Galt encouraged her, saying that if he could read it, anyone could, since this book didn't use divine script. He told her to give it a try. She hesitated, thinking the book looked a bit too daunting. She remarked that the notations in it seemed to only indicate magic. However, as she began to pronounce the next character, she abruptly stopped. Galt thought it was as if she'd been hit by a petrification spell. Then he pointed to a passage and asked Angelica to try reading it. She replied that she couldn't understand things at that level, clearly alluding to a mention of cabbage. Galt pointed to the illustration of a cabbage right there and asked about it. Angelica replied that fresh cabbage is sweet. He explained that the correct answer was that if a typhoon hit a cabbage farm, the public would need relief aid. Since she was a hero and could use magic, he wondered why she didn't know this. She answered that she just randomly remembered abilities and sought a spirit of determination. Galt realized she truly didn't understand anything at all. She went on to say that as long as she had love, courage, and justice on her side, nothing else mattered. He placed a hand on her shoulder and said that he would help her start her studies over from the beginning. The next day, she screamed that she didn't want to, but he reassured her that he would guide her from the very beginning, with the goal of at least getting her accepted into Maginia University. That evening, they sat down to study. She remarked that if she had known this was going to happen, she would have killed him right then and there. As Galt recalled that moment, she insisted that he stop thinking about it because it was impossible. He said that in order to memorize things, eating well was important, and first asked her to write down the names of all the things around her. When she dozed off, Galt yelled that they hadn't even started studying yet. He raised his voice again, asking how she could possibly be sleeping and if she had stayed up late the night before. Angelica shot back, telling him not to lecture her and asserting that she usually gets about 8 hours of sleep every night. However, she added that she wasn't asking him to use that information to hit on her mom. Galt replied that he wasn't thinking about anything of the sort. Just then, Raitia arrived, asking how their study session was going and if they were making any progress. Galt was taken aback and admitted that it seemed like they hadn't gotten much done at all. Suddenly, Angelica smelled something and asked if it was the smell of cookies. Raitia replied that they were still warm and that if Angelica wrote the name of that pastry 10 times, she could have one. Angelica eagerly agreed, and not long after she was enjoying a cookie. While Galt and Raitia talked, Raitia remarked that Angelica was so simple that all Galt needed to do was sweet-talk her. Galt replied that he'd leave that to her, since she knew her daughter best. Raitia added that, depending on Galt's teaching methods, Angelica could easily absorb information, and that she had become so proficient she could be considered a hero in swordsmanship. Galt acknowledged that was true. Raitia continued, saying she knew studying was a challenge, but being a teacher had its own difficulties. She proposed that if Angelica improved, she would give Galt a reward, and asked what he thought. Galt got a little flustered and told Angelica that they would be doing their absolute best from now on. Angelica was surprised and asked why he was suddenly so serious. A week later, they were studying. Galt told Angelica to take a look at herself. She had learned how to read and write. Angelica was thrilled, gauging her own progress and remarking that now her party wouldn't look at her like an idiot anymore. Galt understood how much that had bothered her, realizing Angelica wasn't bad at memorizing things. She just hadn't had the right learning environment before. He encouraged her to keep putting up with the lessons. Just then, Selene and Naharin arrived, and Galt announced to Angelica that it was time for the real studying to begin. He was having them both teach her. As Selene and Naharin greeted her, Angelica was taken aback and asked for the reason behind this arrangement. Galt explained that without a solid academic foundation, Angelica wouldn't be able to develop properly as a mage or a Miko. He assured her that with their skills, teaching her the basics would be a piece of cake. Selene added that it was simple, and Naharin agreed. Angelica couldn't help but think about how her party had fallen into the hands of a demon lord. However, Angelica vowed not to lose or give up, declaring that she was a hero. Every time she understood a lesson, her mother would reward her with some sweets. With that motivation in her heart, Selene and Naharin began to teach her. Galt informed Angelica that she would have to take the academic aptitude test, and if she did well, she could advance even further. As Angelica began her test, Naharin remarked that she could feel a powerful vitality coming from her, something she'd never seen before. She advised Angelica to approach the test with the same fighting spirit she'd have on a battlefield. Selene added that this was a crucial step, and that she believed Angelica could reach the next milestone. After finishing the test, Angelica handed them the paper and asked them to grade it. Naharin commented that Angelica's test results were amazing. Galt praised Angelica for passing, while Selena noted how much she had improved. At first, Angelica struggled with multiplication, but now she could understand advanced calculations. Angelica replied that it was because she's a hero, and no matter what challenges came her way, she was ready to overcome them. In another room, Ritia praised Angelica's excellent performance, crediting her success to Galt. Galt humbly replied that he only did what any father would do. He then rested his head on Retia's lap, and as she gently stroked his hair, she said this was the first time she'd thought about raising a daughter together with her husband. The feeling filled her with joy and pride, and she felt a wave of happiness she had long suppressed. Galt felt the same way, realizing that the happiness they were feeling was something they had never experienced before. However, the next day, a problem arose. Selena voiced her concerns, pointing out that they were facing an issue. Adventurers don't have a secure future. The physical demands of their lifestyle take a toll on their bodies, and as they get older, it becomes harder to achieve good results. This means an adventurer's career is often quite short, and a wise person would choose a more stable profession. Angelica found Selene's argument very reasonable and considered the possibility of giving up her life as an adventurer. Galt spoke up, discussing the importance of learning basic history and economics. He pointed out that hero is just a title, and calling it a profession was a bit vague. He planned to save money for her future retirement fund. Galt mused that becoming more knowledgeable wasn't necessarily a good thing, and felt Angelica's future was becoming more and more uncertain. Meanwhile, at the Demon King's castle, Toluaria informed a woman that the Central Demon Committee meeting would proceed as scheduled, and that she would pass this information on to the Demon King. The woman asked if the Demon King had returned home, and Toluaria confirmed it. The woman admitted she was quite surprised when she first heard the news about the Demon King. She expressed her hope that everything would go smoothly for him, and thought this might shed light on some unresolved issues, making it an event to look forward to. She also wondered who would become the Demon King's heir. Galt sat in the meeting with the other demon lords, reflecting on his long tenure as Demon King, chosen from the lineage of the Luzin clan. However, most of his close family members had died long ago in a war of succession, and now there was no one left who was worthy of inheriting the throne. He had almost completely forgotten about his successor. He then called for the Central Demon Committee meeting to begin, and as all the members stood up and approached, they congratulated him on his remarriage. He thanked them for their well wishes. A member of the council remarked that this was a great step forward for the future of the demon race, now that the heir to the throne had been decided. Galt was shocked to hear about a successor, and seemed to be confused for a full hour. He listened as the members discussed the next candidate for the title of Demon King, or rather the successor, Princess. Galt was stunned, realizing he had never settled this matter until now. Toluaria asked if there were many candidates, but a noblewoman pointed out that Queen Sasaya had no children, and everyone was sweating in the tense situation. However, they had finally come up with an excellent candidate who would become the successor princess. She then asked if that candidate was the Demon King's daughter, Angelica. After the meeting, Galt went home and announced he was back. Angelica looked at his face and remarked that he looked like a regular office worker who had just been chewed out by his boss. Ritia welcomed him home and asked if she should bring him his dinner. Galt thanked her, and then asked to speak with Angelica. Angelica asked what he wanted. He asked if she was interested in the Demon King, and she gave him a strange look. He asked her to stop looking at him like that, feeling as if his heart was about to break. She then asked if he was doubting whether she loved her own father, adding that such a question was disgusting. He replied that it wasn't like that, he was just asking about the concept of the Demon King. She sighed, revealing that she was, in fact, interested in the topic, and said that she was a hero who had defeated the Demon King. Galt thought to himself that this was definitely not the right time to discuss why someone would want to become the Demon King. Just then, Ritia came in with some delicious-looking rabbit and deer meat. Galt remarked that it looked amazing and that he would eat it all to do his best. Immediately, Angelica interrupted them. telling them not to dodge the issue with their husband and wife chatter, but to get to the point of why he brought this up. He then said that he was currently serving as the Demon King, which was like the position of the King of Mazgania. He explained that to avoid a war of succession for the throne, the current king nominates a candidate. He asked what they would call that candidate. Princess Angelica wondered why she felt like she was being given a pop quiz. She answered that the term used is crown prince in the case of the Demon King. He has no relatives or blood family among the demons. Instead, the person who marries into the royal family becomes connected to the throne. Hearing this, Galt became emotional, prompting Angelica to ask why he was crying. He replied that he was just thinking about the long days he spent studying for nothing, and then remarked that she had truly become very smart. He told her about the meeting he'd attended that day, where they discussed the possibility of her becoming the Demon Lord. Angelica, annoyed, asked if he had been drinking before coming home, since she noticed he was acting strangely. He insisted that he wasn't drunk. She said that there was a limit to the foolishness she could tolerate, stressing that she was a hero and, essentially, the Demon Lord's daughter. She wondered why a hero would become the successor to the Demon Lord. Galt acknowledged her point, but explained that all his relatives and potential candidates had disappeared. So they had discussed whether to consider a hero for the position. Galt added that there was a limit to how flexible they could be. Galt replied that he was the last of his failed family line, and they were just considering their final options. He asked her to consider that if she became the Demon Lord, she would stand above all demon beasts, a role a hero should aspire to. She replied that she didn't want any more cake and wanted to be left alone. Then she left for her room. Ritia noted that although Angelica said she didn't need any cake, she had eaten all of it. Galt reflected on how he loved that part of Angelica's personality, how she lives in her own world and never changes. Ritia comforted him, saying there was nothing to worry about. If Angelica is a demon beast, her becoming the successor is a matter of when, not if. However, the real issue was confronting her pain and suffering. Kids Angelica's age usually hate it when others decide their future for them, and this wasn't unique to Angelica. Galt thought that if this story were being told somewhere, it would be great if there were an easy way to understand and resolve it. So he decided he would trust Angelica and carefully explain everything, since there was no other way. Ritia hugged him from behind and said that since it involved demon beasts, she would leave everything to him as Angelica's father. He reflected that shaping a child's future was indeed a father's responsibility. He replied that he understood and would face Angelica directly to tell her the truth. Rita remarked that this was the Galt she knew. Then she kissed his horn and wished him good luck. Galt felt very honored and said he would go talk to Angelica. While she was practicing her swordsmanship in the courtyard, he called out her name, saying that she could still listen to him while she practiced. Angelica retorted that she would do as she pleased. Galt explained that when he spoke of the successor princess position, it was just for convenience and didn't mean he would definitely become the Demon Lord. If he and Rachia had a child, that child would be a potential candidate for the position of prince or princess. Angelica asked if he was really considering doing what married people do. He clarified that he wasn't saying that at all. It was all just a hypothetical. He stressed that he didn't mean she would have the right to fight for the title, nor would he let anyone related to him take the Demon Lord's position. Angelica questioned if he was implying he just wanted to use her name for political reasons. She understood this was a political issue, and as always, she acted just as he had predicted. He still hadn't really trusted her properly. Galt asked her directly if she would become his successor princess, expressing his need for her. He warned that if she refused his offer for some reason, he would consider secretly adopting a child. He also emphasized that the matter of her future mother was for her to decide, and he promised not to let her rights be taken away. He assured her that it was a father's promise. Angelica turned to look at him and said she had one condition. She wanted to be officially recognized as a hero in the kingdom. Furthermore, she insisted that the kingdom of Mazania must know she would be the Demon Lord's successor princess, as she didn't want to endure the stress of being labeled a traitor. Galt agreed to her request, assuring her he would inform the kingdom as soon as possible and would schedule a conference. He emphasized that the key person to bring peace to this world was Angelica. Angelica replied that this was probably due to her mother's love. Meanwhile, a monster girl in her room fumed as she tried to devise a plan to capture the Demon Lord. She was angry with herself for not being able to become the Demon Lord as she'd hoped, but she vowed not to give up. After returning from his meeting with the king, Galt informed Angelica that even if she became a candidate for the Demon Lord's throne, the kingdom would have no problem with it. He explained that the king had said that this wouldn't make the kingdom turn its back on her. In fact, it could be beneficial for them. Radia remarked how wonderful it was that Angelica was becoming the successor princess, and that she seemed destined for a great life. Angelica told Rachel not to act as if she had nothing to do with all of this, saying that just because she was a hero didn't mean she was moving into the Demon Lord's castle. Galt noted that even though he was the Demon Lord, this would be an issue, and they needed to ensure that the King of Magania would recognize her as the successor princess at the ceremony to be held in his castle. Angelica lamented that this was such a hassle for her. However, Rachel insisted that she would get to wear a beautiful dress and attend the event, and that it would be a fun party, like a wedding. Galt reassured them that the ceremony would be held soon, asking Rachel to be patient until then. Rachel replied that she would send invitations to all her friends. Angelica reiterated that she was the one who said she would become the successor princess, and a hero always keeps their promises. Galt thought that perhaps Angelica didn't fully grasp the situation. But on the day of the announcement, as the ceremony was about to begin, some monsters approached her, greeting her, and asking what her aspirations were as the successor princess. Angelica felt it was a little strange, saying that being a bridge between humans and magical beasts would be a wonderful thing. Galt realized she was being interviewed. A man approached and said they wanted to take a picture of her for a magazine, asking Angelica to face him and give a big smile. Angelica gave a slightly awkward smile, and Galt thought her expression didn't quite show discomfort. The man instructed her not to move and asked if he could draw her. Afterward, he walked away to bring some new sweets for the guests, calling her Queen. Galt noticed she seemed to be enjoying the moment. Rachel was delighted to hear the man call Angelica Queen. Galt said that since he was the Demon Lord, she was already considered a queen, and reminded her not to forget about him. As the film crew left, Angelica said goodbye to them, and the man mentioned that when the magazine was finished, they would send her a copy. Angelica replied, asking them to draw her cutely in the picture. She later told her father that when she was introduced as a hero from the kingdom, people treated her like a little girl. However, after being introduced as the crown princess, everyone showed her respect, and it felt new. He replied that it was because she was now a princess. Angelica added that she had another interview scheduled for tomorrow, this time with a reporter from the Magania kingdom, and she had already agreed to it. He thought that Angelica looked completely different from the day before. Angelica mentioned that during the ceremony she wouldn't be able to see her horns, and wondered if they should make a cake just for her. Galt realized that Angelica seemed to be getting quite arrogant after everything that had happened. Angelica reminded him that today was the day a reporter from the kingdom was coming, and they had asked her to sing a song to debut as a singer. They even said she had the potential to fill the entire Magania Budokan. Galt felt that things had changed in a very strange way. Angelica started talking about herself as someone who could inspire and give courage to others. She explained that if singing was also a way to encourage people, then it could open a new path in her life. Raitia offered to leave everything to her, declaring this was the new era of heroes. Galt thought that Raitia's ability to foster growth through praise was truly impressive. Angelica announced that she planned to go to the capital to audition as a singer. Raitia said she would always be by her side to cheer her on. While Galt got to work, he wondered about the oddity of a demon lord who was also a singer. It seemed a bit hasty to him. He noted that even upon consideration, becoming a crown prince or princess was still basically symbolic and unofficial. He felt that Angelica was getting too caught up in the festivities, and if he saw her struggling, he would remind her that the road ahead would only get tougher. Toluarina remarked that from the perspective of an ideal fan, she knew her comment was a bit rude, but Angelica didn't quite capture her interest. Galt replied that he hadn't asked if she found his daughter attractive. He pointed out that Raitia was cheering Angelica on very strongly throughout this process. Toluarina insisted that it was about more than just her being Galt's daughter. Galt thought he should have a serious discussion with his wife about their daughter's future. While at home, he heard Angelica say that she had failed the preliminary audition. Raitia comforted her, saying that not everything goes smoothly on the first try. Angelica agreed, asserting that she wouldn't give up and was determined to sing before a full audience at the Budokan. That evening, Galt sat down with Angelica and asked if she thought people were expecting too much of her. Wanting her to be both a singer and a princess seemed like too heavy a burden. He wanted to make sure Angelica could follow her dreams, but he also felt the need to be honest about the challenges she might face. Galt believed that if he discouraged Angelica, she might never become the hero he hoped for. But to him, as long as she was happy, it was perfectly fine for her to keep trying until she found fulfillment. Galt realized that his own expectations were putting pressure on Angelica, especially since she would become a princess without even having to try to be a singer. Galt confided in Ritia, expressing his gratitude for her support, which helped him realize the truth, and affirmed his resolve to support Angelica. Ritia smiled in agreement, saying she was always counting on him. Galt thought that he needed to work on being a more understanding father. However, when Angelica entered the audition again, she failed once more. Her mother held her tightly, reminding her that she had tried very hard. Angelica declared she wouldn't give up. Galt believed that even though her welcome party was approaching and she still hadn't succeeded in her audition, challenging herself and experiencing failure were still valuable lessons. He understood that being a father meant supporting his child through both success and failure. Finally, the day of the ceremony arrived. As Angelica got ready, she put a pair of fake horns on her head and wondered if she looked good in her new dress. Galt reassured Angelica, saying he didn't mind, as long as she felt confident. Together, they helped her look like a normal girl in the demon world. Angelica reminded him that he was the one who said she should become a princess, so she asked what he really expected from her. Galt agreed and suggested that if she was enjoying it, she should just keep going, emphasizing that her situation was unprecedented. Just then, Raitia entered and remarked that Angelica looked lovely. Tolorina knocked on the door and Galt invited her in. Tolorina announced that Galt's relatives had arrived. Galt asked Raitia and Angelica to stay there for a moment. While he stepped outside, anticipating that the relatives would surely express their displeasure, Tolorina agreed, adding that although they claimed it was a joyous occasion for the princess settling in, the atmosphere was anything but celebratory. Galt knew this feeling well, and standing before his relatives, he sincerely thanked them all for coming. Galt expressed that it was an honor to have them present and acknowledged that his decisions had caused everyone quite a bit of trouble. He announced that after careful consideration, he had decided to remarry, and that there were many potential candidates within the Luzon clan. However, he thought it would be wiser to mix the truth with a bit of tact to soothe their concerns. Galt explained that if he chose any one of them, it could lead to disputes, especially since they all belonged to a fallen clan. To prevent outside influences on their family dynamics, he had chosen someone with no relation to their clan as his wife, hoping that everyone would understand his intentions. They agreed that Galt had made the best decision and recognized his judgment was sound. Galt went on to say that the princess shared the same bloodline as the wife he had chosen, and had absolutely no connection to the Luzon clan, so they should welcome them both warmly. He felt the time for convincing his relatives was over. Now it was up to Angelica to shine on stage, while he watched over her with great expectation. Suddenly a woman ran up and hugged him tightly, leaving Galt stunned for a moment. He stepped back slightly and asked the woman what she was doing. Galt felt that Angelica didn't quite exude the aura he had envisioned. He advised her to calm down as she assessed the situation. Inwardly, he wondered how everything had led to this situation. After finishing his greetings with everyone, Galt planned to return to Ritia and Angelica's side. However, a noblewoman unexpectedly approached and confronted him, demanding an explanation for why he had chosen his own stepdaughter as the princess. She declared that this decision had ruined all of her grand plans. Galt was taken aback, trying to remember who she was. It was unusual for someone to dare act so arrogantly toward him, in a space meant for a fallen clan. Suddenly he realized it was Lady Daddle Frace. She remarked that it had taken him quite some time to recognize her. Galt thought to himself that the Daddle territory was just a small, limited area, and although they were descendants of the Demon King, they held no real power among the nobility. Lady Daddle Frost continued to accuse him, saying he was always too confident in himself. She reminded Galt of the Red Moon viewing party about 15 years ago, an event she wasn't invited to. Similarly, she was also left off the guest list for the solar eclipse celebration 21 years ago. Galt thought to himself that those were just minor events, not worth inviting people with tenuous connections to the main family. However, he knew that if he voiced this thought, she would surely become enraged. He recalled Tolorina mentioning something similar and realized that, at every event, Lady Daddle Frace was always lingering nearby, waiting to be acknowledged. Lady Frace asserted that choosing a human girl as the princess was a completely reckless act. Galt replied that the decision had been carefully considered, emphasizing its importance for the future of the demon race. Lady Freys protested, saying she had planned to marry him and rule by his side, but now all those ambitions had become meaningless. Galt was surprised, stating that he had never heard anything of the sort before. She explained that it was a plan she had kept secret in her heart. Galt thought she was incredibly selfish. Lady Freys laid out her plan. By marrying him, she would elevate her status in high society and capture his attention. Then, she intended to use her influence to make him fall for her. She questioned why he would choose to marry a hero's mother. Galt admitted that he couldn't control his feelings. He had truly fallen in love with Richa. Feeling the conversation had become pointless, he decided to leave. However, Lady Freys insisted she would be his wife, willing to renounce her noble title, which was in name only, in exchange for real power. Galt pointed out that she was well aware of her status as a noble in name only. Lady Freys refuted that, saying her family earned 3.5 million demon gold a year, making them just the lowest tier of nobility. Galt was surprised by the figure she revealed, but she continued to pressure him, demanding he marry her, and claiming that just being his girlfriend would be enough for her to gain some power. Galt realized she was shamelessly admitting her motives. He replied that he didn't need any motives, as he was already devoted to his current wife. Lady Freys then demanded Galt make her his mistress and give her land or money. Although she had gotten quite close to him, he pushed her away. She pointed out that even though she was a woman, he shouldn't treat her so roughly. He still felt a pang of guilt, but also felt this was what she deserved. She used her power to make Galt stop, asserting that he would face the consequences and that this was her special skill, the ability to hold him for a short time, rendering him unable to move. Galt asked what she intended to do during that time, and she replied that she wouldn't attack him, but would instead use her feminine wiles. She embraced him and said she would harass Galt with her seductive wiles. Galt told her to stop and not do something so foolish, but she refused, asserting that she would bewitch him and no longer live a life based only on what they shared. She was acting erratically, and Galt thought that this wasn't Richa he was dealing with, but this woman's own overpowering self. His face remained impassive, which Lady Freys noticed, and she commented on his rudeness. Galt once again affirmed that he was loyal to his current wife. Just then, Angelica appeared, asking him to double-check some preparations for the ceremony and reminding him to come back quickly. When she saw him with Lady Freys, she immediately grew suspicious and asked what he was doing. She expressed her disappointment in him, the man she once thought was so level-headed and rational, for getting involved in what looked like a bit of an affair. Galt hurriedly explained that it was a complete misunderstanding, insisting he had done nothing wrong. Realizing he still couldn't move, he went on saying that Freys was the one hugging him, insisting she initiated the whole thing and that he'd done nothing at all. Angelica was embarrassed to see him shifting all the blame onto the other woman. She said plainly that while she could forgive a betrayer, it was just disrespectful to paint the other person as the only one at fault. Galt acknowledged that it was a fair point, but he believed that in this case, Lady Freys was the one in the wrong. Angelica continued, asserting that she had always trusted him, that she thought he was completely committed to her mother. Then she turned to leave, saying that although she regretted it, she was canceling the princess's coronation ceremony. She couldn't accept this, especially as the daughter of a worthy mother and a hero. Galt begged Angelica to wait and listen to what he had to say, promising she would truly understand his side of the story. Just then, Lady Freys spoke up, saying that it was true the Demon King would be marrying her, and specifically that they were getting married because of an unplanned pregnancy. She urged him to stop spreading lies as he couldn't keep making such baseless accusations. Galt shot back, asking her if this wasn't her golden opportunity. She went on to explain that, in any case, choosing a hero candidate as the Demon King's wife was absurd. She argued that he should marry a demon who would love him, have his child, and then he could choose that child to be the crown prince or princess. Wouldn't that be a better outcome? She continued, explaining that even among the heroines, it was clear she could never become the successor to the kingdom. That was why she had left. She proposed that he have a child with her, and that child would become the Demon King, making her the mother of the new Demon King. Galt found himself somewhat agreeing with her, realizing that sooner or later problems would arise, and the chance of a real conflict was very high. She asserted that she would use every option available, and if she could use her power, she wouldn't give up until she achieved her goal. She told him not to worry about his daughter becoming the princess, and he agreed with her, feeling relieved and able to move again. She was surprised to see this change in him. He realized Angelica was putting on a prideful, sulky face. He quickly cut her off, declaring that he didn't care about appointing a princess. His family was more important than anything. She was surprised and asked him to wait. But he realized that even though he didn't care about the princess coronation ceremony, he still needed to tell his daughter the truth first. He was determined to face her as a father, not as the demon king. Galt noticed Angelica sitting all alone, and he called out to her. He approached her urgently, begging her to listen, as he needed to tell her the truth about the situation. He explained that the woman hugging him earlier was Frace, a member of a fallen noble family, driven by her own selfish desires. She was trying to force him to marry her, which was why she was acting that way towards him. Even though she was hugging him against his will, he couldn't deny that a part of him enjoyed it. After all, it's just a man's instinct when something like that happens. Angelica replied that it would be better if he just stayed away from that kind of behavior. He reassured her, saying he didn't want her to think he was hiding anything. And he admitted that his actions had caused her to misunderstand. He apologized, hoping that would settle the matter. However, Angelica seemed unconvinced, insisting it was still cheating. She then asked him what he was going to do, saying that at the very least she would be changing the ceremony. Galt was taken aback and asked her if something was wrong. She asked if that would create a huge scandal for him, which would certainly bother her as well. He explained that he couldn't force someone to become the crown princess if they didn't want the role, and no matter how much she pushed, their feelings couldn't be changed. She asked if he was really saying that, shocked by his firm stance. He wondered why she was so surprised. She replied that she wondered if he was even cut out for politics, and she suggested that he should just push forward forcefully regardless of their refusal. She noted that if the crown princess's coronation were cancelled, it could lead to serious political backlash. He said that even so, she couldn't compare a minor issue like that to the sadness she was feeling. After all, before he was the Demon King, he was her father. He felt he was focusing too much on her demands, realizing she didn't want to call him father. She asked if he was trying too hard to be a good father, and that if he was really trying to hide his feelings, it was just making her feel embarrassed. Angelica changed the subject, saying she needed to prepare for the upcoming events, and started to walk away. He asked her if she accepted his apology. She replied that there was no way someone as clumsy as him could be unfaithful, and that she knew what he was trying to say. He retorted that he wasn't clumsy. As the Demon King, he had to fulfill many responsibilities, and he would handle it. She shot back that she'd never been told she was bad at communicating with people.